Sort of coming chapter 1025. Last year, this year and next year, spring to spring, flowers bloom and fall, and the Lord always decides. A young man in white was walking alone on the official road outside the capital, holding a large amount of stinky tofu made of bamboo skewers in each hand, and eating his mouth full of red pepper oil. The young man was chewing stinky tofu, suddenly raised his head and glanced at the sky, his cheeks bulging, and he was amazed. I have received good news from a real person, and there is no doubt in the world. It was originally a celestial phenomenon with few stars in the moon, but in an instant the galaxy was brilliant, as if a bright moon temporarily abdicated to give a sage to a Tianhe. But this vision was fleeting. I believe that the Qin Tianjian in various countries has captured this strange astronomical phenomenon. If there is no accident, it will soon turn into a pot of porridge which is destined to be a sleepless night. Cui Dongshan pouted. Is that the latest one from the 14 realms? It is estimated that the old scholar has helped the old you a lot. Otherwise, according to Cui Dongshan's deduction, Fu Lu Yuxuan's opportunity to meet the Tao will be after the 3 sect patriarchs disperse. He lifted the stinky tofu in his hand and wrote the word, in the air. Cui Dongshan withdrew his hand, quickly ate a few strings of stinky tofu, lost the bamboo stick, freed up one hand, and shook the snow-white sleeve that he called, beating the stupid place. From the inside, a golden elixir was thrown out. It was the Taoist Longzhou Taoist Lu Mao from the Huanghua Temple in Mirage City. The mountains and rivers are long and the night is long, and there is still a long way to go from the destination of this trip. I have to find someone to chat and relieve my boredom. Lu Mao, who was thrown out of his sleeve, stood still, not sure where he was, let alone asking a few more questions. Cui Dongshan raised his hand. Do you want to eat stinky tofu? Lu Mao shook his head. I'm not used to it. Cui Dongshan complained. Pampered with fine skin and tender meat, it is hypocritical. Lu Mao didn't dare to retort. If it is said that the young hidden official is a deep-seated city man, and that there are some traces of ideas that can be traced, and it is just a lot of brains to communicate, then this sect master Cui, who claims to be the opponent's student, is simply unreasonable. Crazy. Even if there is something in Qin Pingan's words, it's still ugly, but after all, Qin Pingan won't give himself an old fist for no reason, but Cui Dongshan will, and if there is a disagreement he will punch Lu Mao together. Takes push and knock to get enlightened. Cui Dongshan chewed stinky tofu and shook his head. It's delicious, delicious, delicious. Lu Mao followed him silently, and he had to admit that he was certain that he would form a pill in this retreat, but without the horizontal step of the boy in white during the retreat, Lu Mao didn't think he could dan. Into the 3rd grade, earning the atmosphere of the dan room that I did not dare to expect beforehand, but it was purely an accidental joy. The purple air was transpiring, and the dan room was used as a book city with 50,000 scrolls inserted. On the mountain it is said that the legendary Danqing is the 1st grade, and it is a surefire candidate for ascension. For example, Zhao Tianlai, the Tianshi of Longhu Mountain, the real person of Huolong, and the self-titled owner of the 72 Peaks, Wei Shi, are all there. This column. However, the Ascension Realm Great Cultivator formed pills in his early years, and most of them were 2nd-rank pills, so the 3rd-rank pill was still the dream of many Earth immortals. In return, Lu Mao needed to assist the first suzerain of the Qingping sword sect to quietly complete one thing and develop a seismometer that could accurately measure the changes in the mountains and rivers of Tonggishao. Lu Mao can't help but refuse to agree, but this kind of feat isn't it Lu Mao's thoughts and thoughts, but it can only always be a beautiful thing in the attic in the sky? Cui Dongshan asked casually. The chicken distance pen that you improved is pleasing to my eye, and the 2nd batch is sold. Has Your Majesty the Emperor found a good home? Lu Mao answered truthfully. His Majesty's plans there is no way to know. The former Daquan dynasty, which was so poor that it was impossible to open the pot, set up a new office in the construction office. Yao Jinji, intentionally or unintentionally, built the factory site at the Lotus Bridge near the Baoquan Bureau of the Ministry of Housing and Songchang Yamen, which is only a few meters away from Lu Mao's Huanghua Temple. Footpath. The last time His Majesty the Emperor visited the Taoist temple in person and had a talk with Lu Mao. Not long after His Majesty returned to the palace, Lu Mao had a noble and powerful beauty official, and also obtained a secret enshrining status as an official in the Ministry of Punishment. With Mao's help, the secretary of the office soon became a cash cow and a cornucopia of the imperial court. The main purpose is to create the kind of imperial system chicken distance pen, which is now exported to the Immortal mansion on the mountain and the countries under the mountain in the north and south of a continent. Cui Dongshan said with a smile. Things of 10 taels of silver are sold at the price of 1 snow money. Mr. Fan and Baozhai Zhangji from the merchant saw it, and I am afraid they will drool. Lu Mao hesitated, but he still held back. The biggest hero, isn't it your husband? For the first batch of chicken pitch pens, Daquan Yao's really no longer has to look for a buyer, because Jade Guizhong has ordered a full 30,000 chicken pitch pens, which will be bundled with the Luomei paper secretly made by Jiang's Cloud Cave Blessed Land. The price of a chicken-spaced pen under the guise of imperial system is 1 snow money, which is a full 1,000 taels of silver. But in fact the cost of the materials consumed is probably around 7 or 8 taels of silver. At most, some cloud patterns and auspicious words are added, and the labor costs of skilled craftsmen will not exceed 10 taels of silver. No wonder Lu Mao heard that the price would be staggering. The price set by the imperial court is really too black-hearted. But anyway, it is to make money from the immortal masters on the mountain and the dignitaries of various countries, and it can't be used by the poor. Besides, Lu Mao, a Taoist priest, has completely drawn a clear line with the identity of the prince of the previous dynasty. Especially Lu Mao has just formed a golden elixir not long ago. Becoming a legendary land fairy, he is no longer interested in these secular disputes, or the situation forced him to make a choice without knowing his philosophy. Cui Dongshan had eaten the remaining stinky tofu, and threw the bamboo sticks as hidden weapons one by one, shouting swish swish. Then he hiccuped. Cui Dongshan twisted his wrist to create an extra bamboo utensil and said with a smile, "Longzhou Immortal Chief, will you fiddle with this?" Lu Mao nodded. He had a wide range of knowledge and naturally recognized this bamboo drum, which is commonly known as the fishing drum in the folk, and also has a name in Taoism, the Tao drum, which is slightly different from the fishing drum. In the past, some literati in the court and the opposition in Daquan also liked to play with this thing, playing fishing drums, singing Taoist songs and reciting a moral Huang Ting. When Lu Mao was still the prince of Daquan, he was famous for his elegance. Cui Dongshan knocked on the drum for himself, but deliberately walked the board, making Lu Mao, an expert, only feel noisy. You must know that Lu Mao is a person with obsessive-compulsive disorder, so it is more difficult to endure. When Qin Pingan was in the Taoist study, but the books were placed in the wrong place, Lu Mao would feel awkward. On this deserted and lonely official road, Cui Dongshan joked with Lu Mao while jumping and screaming, "The great Sui Gao clan of Beipingzu, the country has 1,200 years, a full 1,000 years and 200 years. That is, back then the territory of Aquarius Island was small and no one looked down on it, otherwise it would scare people to death. In the history of Middle-earth Shenzhou, how many dynasties were able to live such a long life? Do you know where Gao's Longxing land is?" Lu Mao said, "Yiyang County, according to historical records, has been fond of fishing drums since ancient times." Cui Dongshan gave Lu Mao a thumbs up and said with admiration, "You know so much about useless knowledge." Lu Mao was silent. Cui Dongshan said with a smile, "If there is a chance, I will definitely help you to introduce him to Dasui Dengjinzi, and Yu Lu, who was born in the Lu dynasty. The three of you have similar backgrounds and similar circumstances. Talking about it, drinking high and talking about their sadness, they will definitely hug their heads and cry wow 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 and teach others to be sad when they see it. One is the prince of the fallen country, who is in the half of the country's martial arts and has become a bereaved dog who does not dare to keep his surname. Yu Lu Yu Lu Yu Lu, the rest of the Lu family. The new emperor of the great Sui dynasty, Zhou Xian, had a good aptitude for cultivating and had a deep fortune. Otherwise, in Lizhu Cave, Zhou Xian would not have been able to buy the golden carp and a dragon king basket from Li's second hand. Just because of the covenant with the Li Song clan, Zhou Xian had to go to Linlu Academy in Piyun Mountain, Longquan County to study as a proton. Because he has long been cultivated as a prince, he can obviously go up the mountain to cultivate Taoism. The immortal who has lived for a long time has to be obstructed by the rules of the Confucian temple. Sitting on the dragon chair as the emperor, and ruling his own longevity is tantamount to seeking short-sightedness. As for Lu Mao next to him, he had bad luck and a bad fate, so he had to embark on a path of cultivation. If possible, I believe that Lu Mao would definitely be willing to take a future achievement on the mountain in exchange for a dragon robe, just to be an emperor in the world for a few years. Everyone wants something, everyone doesn't have it. Lu Mao said indifferently, then he'll ask Sect Master Cui to introduce him. Cui Dongshan put away the bamboo tube, put it back into his sleeve and rubbed his chin. Back then when Ning Yao entered Lizhu Cave, there was a sinister sneak attack that seemed headless. So far it has not been possible to trace the origin to the source. This is a worrying thing that makes Cui Dongshan feel annoyed every time he thinks of it. The old may have guessed it but deliberately didn't say it. Qi Jingchun may have figured it out but he also didn't tell his husband. The gentleman must be most concerned, but after so many years he has not mentioned a single word to anyone. Yang Yugu, a vassal of the great Sui dynasty Huang Tinghua. Cui Dongshan sighed and scratched his head vigorously. The boy in white in the corner of Lu Mao's eyes has a unique bearing of his own. It seems to be relaxed and lazy like a real person. Occasionally if something is lost, thoughtful. Cui Dongshan stood on tiptoe, looked into the distance and said, "Friend Longzhi, we have to hurry up." Lu Mao nodded. After forming the pill, Qi practitioners can shrink the ley lines and cross mountains and rivers, such as crossing fields, ridges and ditches. To be honest, if Cui Dongshan had not become an earth immortal and was held in his sleeve by Cui Dongshan, he would occasionally be able to fall out like this at night to breathe. Otherwise, Lu Mao would have long wanted to find a secluded place to practice and use various earth immortal magical powers. Shrinking the mountains and rivers, chasing the sun and the moon, ascending to the sky and flying in the daytime. It's just that Cui Dongshan didn't shrink the ground or ride the wind, but resorted to a crappy method that made Lu Mao cry and laugh. Armored equestrianism and fast walking are the most commonly used mountain immortal techniques for monks in the lower 5 realms. Lu Mao saw that Cui Dongshan was seriously writing the name of an ancient on his forehead, then squatted down, tied a red book rune on his leg, stood up, shook his wrist and jumped vigorously a few times. Then Cui Dongshan shook out a rune horse from the snow-white sleeve that looked like a treasure box, and when it landed, it was a snow-white horse. "Daoist Longzhou, what are you doing? Get on your horse. This is the shining lion horse that is often seen in the romance of Jianghu. It is more than 10 feet long from head to tail and 8 feet high from hoof to ridge. It is extraordinary and can travel thousands of miles a day in 800 nights. I'm on my way relying on foreign objects, so I don't have enough money for Taoism." Between the words, the boy in white rushed forward, opened his throat and shouted with a loud laugh, "Let's go through the clouds and fog." Lu Mao rode on the talisman horse, one person at a time, as fast as thunder on the post road. All of them were blurred, as if stretching out a white train. Cui Dongshan ran wildly all the way, waving his hands and galloping, "Yunyan Kingdom, Ha Shao Yunyan, we Shao Zhenxian should really come here for a stroll." Only then did Lu Mao know that he had come to Yunyan country. After that, Cui Dongshan entered a county in the land of Yunyan Kingdom, Jiangyi in Xian County, where there are as many as 6 county magistrates alone. Cui Dongshan put away those gods, and then retrieved the talisman from Lu Mao's hand. The horse, familiar with the door and the road, walked through the streets and alleys, and finally brought Lu Mao to a closed bookstore. In fact, almost the entire street is filled with bookstores. Cui Dongshan stood at the door and asked, "Do you know why the entire Jiangyi region of Yunyan Kingdom has not suffered from wars?" Lu Mao shook his head and said, "I don't know. In some great dynasties with prosperous national power at the foot of the mountain, the imperial court often likes to compile large series of books with tens of thousands of volumes, as a symbol of political qingming and peaceful events. For example, when the national surname of the Daquan dynasty was still Lu, he once compiled a huge book of emperors and emperors, and the Prince Lu Mao was the real president behind the scenes. The capital of Yunyan Kingdom has instead become a paradise that escaped the military disaster from beginning to end. After the country was restored, almost no construction and repairs were needed. As to why the Yunyan Kingdom was able to escape this catastrophe, there are different opinions about the immortal masters on Izhou Mountain. Cui Dongshan rubbed his hands together and smiled. There are few springs in the poor and suspicious alleys, and the moon is brightest in the rich and the rich. The book city is not at night. Go in and have a look and I will show you a lot of knowledge. In this country of Yunyan, not only the official large-scale printing of books, but also private engraving and publishing by booksellers are also common practice. Just talking about such an inconspicuous shop with a rough estimate, there are as many as 90,000 engravings in the warehouse. Cui Dongshan put his hands on the back of his head and said with a smile, "It's not from a scholarly family, it's a family of Shirlu." It's rich in literary style and it's really exciting whether it's Gui or Lan or Xiao or Miao Yingzhan but not scholarly. Absolutely. I have to inform the owner of the bookstore that I have been robbed. This kind of chivalrous heart is a song in tears. Lu Mao just shut up and he was able to turn a blind eye to Cui Dongshan's absurd actions and strange remarks. Cui Dongshan took all the engravings in his pocket and asked Lu Mao to wait here for a while, saying that he was going to see a future guest of his own sect. The boy in white was walking alone on the street. The rabbits fly away in the sky and the world has come and gone. I hope that Emperor Qing will always be the master and not teach the world to fall. In the ancestral hall of an old mansion, there are 2 portraits hanging on the wall. No names are written. In addition to the incense burner, there are also several beautifully mounted ancient books wrapped in blue and white silk. There was a middle-aged man with nothing unusual in appearance, except that he was dressed in unusual clothes, wearing a variegated shirt, mixed with green, red, moon white and gray and black. After paying respect to the incense, he put 3 sticks of incense in the incense burner. Without turning around, he said indifferently, "Since he is a monk who went up the mountain, why did he come down the mountain to be a thief?" On the side of the beam, a head stuck out. The gentleman on the beam is also a gentleman. It turned out that the boy with a face with a Chinese character, wearing white clothes, rolled over and fell to the ground after his whereabouts were discovered. I saw that when the white-clothed boy landed, he looked like he had a sprained foot. His face was sullen at first, and then he couldn't bear the pain for a long time. The scribe frowned and reminded, "Silence." The boy with the national character face patted his stomach. "I'm a little hungry. I don't know if there is any food here. White rice is enough, no wine and vegetables. I'm the best person I can handle." The scribe remained silent, just quietly watching this unidentified, uninvited guest. The young man laughed and said, "But it's better to use that kind of hard-working firewood, such as dismantling the legs of an old car. I don't know if you have it here?" The scribe narrowed his eyes, his face was gloomy, and he stared at this seemingly open-mouthed young man. But the boy in white put his hands behind his back and looked at a hanging portrait on the wall. "Hey, what a coincidence, it happened to enshrine Mr. Gongzheng, a good official. The identity of this other person, let me guess. It is said that good paper can live for thousands of years, but what is the truth? Improper storage of books, moth-eaten, moldy paper, etc., are all small calamities. Wait, it belongs to the middle calamity. It is the soldiers and the imperial court that ordered the destruction of the forbidden books. These are the great calamities of the books." Speaking of which, the young man looked down and looked at the ancient books on the table. If every ancient book can be passed down for hundreds of years, it is not the protection of ghosts and gods, right? The young man then retracted his gaze, turned his head to look at the scribe and said with a smile, "You are an uncompromising and meritorious minister. After all, you have left some literary luck for Tong Yezhou." The scribe laughed at himself. "It's just self-preservation, it can't be called meritorious." Cui Dongshan nodded and said, "Of course I'm just saying a polite word to you. My husband taught me that sweetness can be used as money when you go out." Cui Dongshan nodded to himself and said, "When you're out, do someone a favor and help. Helping people is worthless, why not do it?" The scribe twitched the corners of his mouth and said, "It seems that fellow Daoist has a good gentleman. There are immortals and Buddhas in the family and there is the true way for daily use. If you enter the room of Zhilan, the secret palace of Linlang, you can be sages even if you are not holy." The boy in white put his hands on his back and laughed. "My husband also heard the truth of not spending money from the old man in his hometown." The scribe said, "If fellow Daoists have finished speaking, then I will issue an expulsion order." Cui Dongshan waved his hand. "No, it's still early, I'm just talking about things regardless of my heart and no one is perfect. It's like Tuzi buying meat. He goes on the scale and weighs 2 pounds. One collects the money, the old man is innocent and the other buys the meat. Only when it comes to scholars doing learning, do they need to argue and discuss their hearts." Listening to the strange words of the strange outsider, the scribe finally couldn't help but ask, "Who are you, who is qualified to be rewarded here for meritorious deeds?" Cui Dongshan blinked. "He's been here before and you've seen him, right?" The scribe smiled and asked, "It's inexplicable and mindless, what the is fellow Daoist talking about?" Cui Dongshan waved his sleeves and complained, "We are all scholars, we can eat indiscriminately but we can't talk nonsense. I warn you not to talk nonsense. I am a bad-tempered person so be careful what you say." Mindless. The scribe smiled and said, "No matter how holy you are, you might as well open the skylight and say something bright. Tell me if you have anything to do with me." Because of Dao's roots, although his ability to fight can be completely ignored, he is really not afraid of the entanglement of a great cultivator. Especially in this world, Tong Yezhou returned to the hands of the Confucian temple. He also did not feel that a great monk on the mountain would dare to act recklessly in the land of Jiangyi in the current Yunyan kingdom. The teenager took out a Yuzhu folding fan from his sleeve, twisted his fingers and opened it with a snap. There were 4 characters written on the fan convincing people with virtue. "I take the liberty of visiting today, just to have a small request to discuss it with you. Fellow Daoist, please speak. Follow me in the future. Take care of someone who is so ruthless. You can also eat and drink spicy food. If I refuse?" The teenager turned the fan and it was also 4 big characters and he refused to be beaten to death. The scribe choked for a moment, was silent for a long time and said with a sneer, "Friend, Daoist's tone is not small." Cui Dongshan gently waved the bamboo fan. "When he stood here, did he say anything?" The scribe asked back, "Are you a gentleman of a certain academy?" Cui Dongshan's eyes were sad as if he was very wronged. "It's good, why are you scolding people?" The scribe narrowed his eyes and said, "Fellow Daoist's words are witty. You really don't recognize me?" "I don't know and I don't want to know." Dongshan. The scholar was stunned. Dongshan? The Cui Dongshan of Qingping Sword Sect? After all, if you can find the monks here all the way, they will definitely not be ordinary Qi practitioners. In the capital of Yunyan Kingdom, on the day when the 2 dragons raised their heads in February this year, the Ancestors' Hall was temporarily formed to dig a big ditch. There are only 2 seats in the Ancestors' Hall. The originators' forces such as Yu Guizong worshipped Wang Ji, and there was an old patriarch who was very senior but unknown in foreign nationality. Of course, there is also the Qingping Sword Sect who was born in the sky. They are Chong Qiu, who is at the helm of Chuanfu, and Chao Qingqing, the master of Jingxing Peak. For some reason, Miyu, the great sword immortal who was the chief enshrined, actually gave the seat of the patriarch hall to the young Chao Qingqing. So why not take a great sword immortal from the Great Wall of Sword Qi seriously? Miyu, who has the nickname of Ms. Waste, really won't hold grudges about it? Cui Dongshan closed the folding fan and said with a smile, "As long as you agree to my invitation, I can in turn promise you one thing as a greeting. Believe me, that is something that you have been thinking about for thousands of years, and it will definitely make you get it. Get what you want." "Oh, could it be that sect master Cui can read minds?" "Mind reading? Nothing, I'm better at guessing people's thoughts." The scholar of Yunyan Kingdom, who was born from the manifestation of the literary movement, smiled and said, "Tell me about it." Cui Dongshan said, "I will take you to the Zhongtu Confucian temple in the future to exchange knowledge with Jingsheng Shiping." "Really? Take it seriously, it must be taken seriously." Cui Dongshan patted his chest and said, "My husband, am a good friend who has never met before, dear friend." The scribe pondered for a moment and said, "Let me think about it." Cui Dongshan nodded and said, "That's right." The scribe suddenly asked, "Aren't you afraid that I will collude with him?" Cui Dongshan sighed, "You're such a scrap, you think too highly of yourself. The reason why I ask this is just curious. When he stood here he was crying silently and crying." Cui Dongshan hurriedly defended himself, "Don't be angry, I'm a straight talker but a knife with a bean-curd heart. Don't you believe me?" The boy in white sighed, full of the smell of stinky tofu. The scribe was dumbfounded. Cui Dongshan tapped his fan on his shoulder and smiled. The barbarian culture is meticulous, and suffers from ignorance of confidence in the world. It is only said that many years ago Haoran Jiaxing, who left his hometown, once stood on the hanging mountain for a long time, looking north at his hometown alone. Cui Dongshan suddenly stretched out his hand to cover his mouth. "Since it's my own family, I have to make a small report with you. A thief stole your engraving plate. It's hateful and hateful, let's beat him." The capital of Yushuan Kingdom, Yongjia County. In an alley, a Taoist priest stopped abruptly, looked into a small courtyard and let out a sigh. In the courtyard, there was a slender young man who was weaving a dustpan under the light of the moonlight. His ears were sharp and he was startled at first. When he turned his head to look at the other side of the alley and crossed the low wall, he saw that familiar face. A dark young man full of his face was surprised, he couldn't believe it and murmured, "Wu Dao Chong." The Taoist twitched his beard and smiled. It's purely a coincidence that we met again. The boy hurriedly put down the dustpan half-woven in his hand, got up and walked to the low wall and asked in surprise, Wu Daochang is this? In the middle of the night, Daochang Wu couldn't come here to admire the moon, right? The Taoist priest looked around and said solemnly, recently there are monsters in the capital and the Taoism is not shallow, rampant and good at hiding and escaping. Tonight Pin Dao is tracking the other side's tracks all the way to this point. I never thought about it or let it escape. In a good place in the country, under the feet of the emperor so arrogant and lawless, the poor Dao naturally can't bear it. Generally, a cultivator who knows a little bit of magic is powerless to deal with it. Oh, but since you encounter a poor Dao, let it be this trip down the mountain to go out. I haven't read the almanac. Teenager is bewildered. Seeing this, the Taoist priest changed to a simple and easy-to-understand vernacular. There is a monster who has become a spirit and he goes down the mountain to harm people. The young man's eyes lit up for a moment and sure enough he was guessed by himself. This Daoist Wu, who is very immortal at first glance, is definitely not only a fortune teller to make money, he is really the kind of immortal who can subdue demons and eliminate demons. The walls of the yellow mud courtyard are not high, and the two sides have a dialogue on the partition wall. The teenagers in the hospital were short and thin, while the Taoist priests in the alley were slender and a head taller. The young man was worried and asked in a low voice, Daochang Wu, the monster has escaped, will it harm anyone? Since Pin Dao has appeared and played with it, it already knows how powerful it is, and it will definitely not dare to show up in the capital tonight, and will only find a place to hide. The Taoist smiled and said, besides, it was only temporarily escaped from sight. Pin Dao has several unique immortal methods and he guarantees that he will win it before dawn and he will be sure. The young man secretly backed his hands, rubbed his sackcloth clothes and got up his courage, said with a face, Wu Daochang sit inside? The Taoist snorted, all right, I'll drink it with you. The water doesn't need to be boiled. If you have a water tank you can just pour a spoonful of well water into it. The young man opened the door of the courtyard and led the Taoist priest into the courtyard. He first let the Taoist Wu sit on the bench and he immediately went to the kitchen to spoon water. The Taoist priest was really not particular about sitting on a stool, but just sat straight on the steps. Over there he gently reminded the young man that he could just take the gourd, no need to take the bowl. When the young man trotted all the way over, the Taoist priest took the old gourd, raised his head and drank it, wiping his mouth. After returning the gourd, the Taoist priest exhaled and said with a smile, thank you. A scoop of water is enough. When the young man put the gourd and scoop back in the stove and returned, the Taoist priest smiled and said, by the way, I have never asked your name or name. The young man didn't sit on the bench either. He sat on the steps like Daochang Wu, leaned to his side and replied respectfully, Daochang Wu, my name is Bai Yun. The Taoist priest nodded. The surname is Bai Mingyun? It is indeed a name that is easy to remember. In Lu Chen's chapter on Heaven and Earth there was a phrase, 1,000 years old, tired of the world and gone to the immortals, riding the white clouds to the emperor's hometown. Maybe this is the real book without coincidence? The young man hesitated for a moment then said in a low voice, I don't dare to lie to the Taoist priest. In fact, Bai Yun is only my current name. My original surname is Ning and my name is Ningji. The Taoist priest was obviously a little surprised. He sighed and said with a smile, surname Ning? A very good surname. After a moment of silence, the Taoist said with admiration, if the astronomical disorder is turbulent and the wind and fog are always present, Ningji can only be obtained by practicing morality. Ningji, a good name. Apart from the literal meaning, I think the person who gave you this name back then. I have high hopes for you. The young man was stunned for a while, then his face was sullen and he lowered his head, but the young man quickly raised his head and smiled at the knowledgeable Wu Daochang. This young man named Ningji, deep in his eyes, there is a kind of sadness that seems to be self-pity, but also a kind of unknown gratitude. Qin Pingan patted the young man on the shoulder and said with a smile, but I think that the name may not have that kind of expectation, it's just a literal meaning, that's all. I just hope that you will be free from illness and disaster and be safe and sound. For those who have been young, seeing some young people again is like seeing myself. Ningji, who could barely sullen face, immediately burst into tears after hearing this sentence, lowered his head and nodded vigorously. The sorrow and nostalgia of the youth are full of moonlight, flowing like water. The night fog was like a gauze and in the hazy, there was the outline of a mountain gentleman, a pair of fist-sized eyeballs, glittering and captivating. This Xianjun walked silently with a huge body, teeth higher than people and as big as an ox. Generally speaking, there are many snakes in the mountains, but the mountain walkers in this temple have never seen large insects or long insects. Fortunately, the mountain walkers in the temple did not see this scene. The monks in the temple were all naked-eyed mortals who had never practiced immortality, otherwise they would be scared to death. Yuan Huajing carried a cotton bag and said to the Xianjun, "You go back first, I will tell Shanjuchen about that matter, but whether it is successful or not depends on your own good fortune. There is the famous mountain of the big temple, and there are many illusions similar to the fish and dragon listening to Sanskrit." Shanjun nodded his head, turned around and left. Yuan Huajing used the small temple on the mountain as a place to relax and escape the summer heat, and he had known this mountain gentleman who could not refine his form for many years. For hundreds of years, the monks in the mountains have never seen him in their entire lives. There is only one Shanjizhang with a long history left. There was a Shanliang who specially protected the Dharma for the great monks. When the monks' hearts were irregular, it would roar and warn. Yuan Huajing looked towards the gate of the mountain, stepped out one step, and his figure dissipated like a cloud. When he gathered, he was already in the temple. In an elegant and quiet guest room, there were still lights in the room. The young hidden official who showed off the appearance of an old scholar with 2 white temples, held a scroll of Taoism, opened the door and said with a smile, "Why did Yuan Jianxian go down the mountain?" In fact, the two sides talked a lot during the day in the pavilion by the Zhou Xian cliff. Yuan Huajing stretched out his hand and handed the bag to Qin Pingon. "It's a native product of this place, 3 caddies of yellow essence. It's not respectful to talk about it. Good stuff. I've always wanted to go to the mountains to dig it up, but it's just been delayed until now." Qin Pingon was unceremonious, took the bag from Yuan Huajing's hand, lifted it and weighed it, even the bag with Huang Jing 2 genes and 9 tails. Huang Jing can tonify qi, soothe the 5 internal organs and prolong life by long wearing. Therefore, this substance is also known as wujizi in medicine books, because of the essence of obtaining the earth. So there is a saying among the qi practitioners on the mountain that the immortals have surplus food, and it has always been one of the common medicinal foods for the immortal masters of genealogy. However, the medicinal properties of Polygonatum chinensis vary widely from place to place. In fact, Qin Pingon is no stranger to this. It was found in the mountains in his hometown back then, and it was not a rare thing, so he was more accustomed to calling it preserved rice as a kind of grass for saving the poor. Yuan Huajing said straight to the point, "I have nothing to do without going to the 3 treasures hall. I went down the mountain overnight this time because I have something to ask for." Qin Pingon lifted the bag of Huang Jing in his hand and smiled. "It's okay to take someone else's hand and say it straight. Whoever can help will definitely help." Yuan Huajing said, "There are tigers in the mountains. They have been enlightened for hundreds of years, but they have not been able to successfully refine their shapes. These few kilograms of yellow essence came from the earth. I just helped to give them away." Qin Pingon thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "These mountain spirits are magical, but they are stagnant in the shape of a skin and become strange. No wonder they are in a hurry and go to the doctor in a hurry." Yuan Huajing patiently waited for the answer. Qin Pingon mentioned the Book of Taoism in the middle, which can also be said to be a herbal book with a brief summary. Since ancient times, Taoism and medicine have not been separated. Since it happened to be a fate for each other. "I'm here to help." Yuan Huajing nodded and turned to leave. Qin Pingon smiled and said, "I've come here, don't rush to leave anyway, I have nothing to do, so let's talk a little more." Involuntarily, he led Yuan Huajing across the threshold. Qin Pingon put the book on the table and brought a chair to Yuan Huajing. Yuan Huajing looked at the extremely simple house, which was similar to his residence. Qin Pingon smiled and said, "The Zhou Haijing who supplemented the earthly branches gave you a lot of headaches, didn't you?" When Yuan Huajing thought of this great female master, he really had a headache, but it was strange that Zhou Haijing joined the earthly branch. Qin Pingon asked casually, "If I remember correctly, you seem to have been the orthography of Daoist Secretary Province?" Yuan Huajing said indifferently, "It's just a family arrangement, poetry and prose, false things on paper, nothing to help people's customs, strong men don't do it." Qin Pingon whispered, "Listening, this is a bit odd. Do you have a back pain when you stand? Do you have the ability to go out and how?" Yuan Huajing smiled. suddenly remembered that the young hidden official in front of him as a close disciple of Wensheng's lineage, seemed not to be even a gongxing or a scholar. Qin Pingon asked, "How did you first think of coming here to hide in peace?" Yuan Huajing looked a little bit self-deprecating and gave a vague answer that was equivalent to not saying, "The ghosts are making things happen." Then Yuan Huajing asked back, "Are you here for something?" Qin Pingon wondered, "Why do you ask this?" Yuan Huajing glanced at this seemingly sincere guy and he was full of slander. Why should he ask you? The young mountain master of Luopa Mountain is a master who doesn't see rabbits and doesn't scatter eagles. Qin Pingon smiled and said, "Could it be that Yuan Zhenxian thinks that what I'm asking for has collided with your purpose of coming here and it can't be beaten, so he has to go down the mountain overnight, which can not only help the Taoist friend in the mountain to find a solution, but also come to my side, find out?" The answer is yes, you have to die, otherwise Yuan Zhenxian still has a chance. Yuan Huajing nodded and admitted generously, "I do have this idea." Qin Pingon said, "If you say that I came here for nothing, you certainly don't believe it, but no matter what you think, I just treat people with sincerity, and I have nothing outside my heart. What I ask for is indeed not outside my body." Two were silent for a while. Qin Pingon was the first to speak and asked curiously, "What kind of treasure is it worth Yuan Jiangxian's attention?" Aware of Qin Pingan's strange expression, Yuan Huajing said angrily, "Whether it is a son of the Yuan family or a sword cultivator, there is no reason to not ask for it or take it by force." Qin Pingon nodded. Yuan Huajing still had some conceit and arrogance. Yuan Huajing suddenly asked, "Have you seen the chicken soup monk, the monk Xinqing?" Qin Pingon nodded. "When I participated in the discussion in the Confucian temple, I saw this Buddhist dragon elephant from afar, but I never talked." "Then have you heard about the 3 guardians of this Buddhist dragon elephant?" Qin Pingon shook his head. It was the first time he heard about such secrets. Seeing Yuan Huajing's skepticism, he could only explain with a smile, "Believe it or not, I have learned a lot about the Buddhist koan for so many years, but it's true that I don't really explore the secret things on the mountain." Yuan Huajing was very suspicious, so he roughly explained the 3 Dharma guarding sessions. The first Dharma guarding of the monk Xinqing was the sutra on the back of a white horse, and the Dharma was passed on to the east. The second time, in the Qingming world, there was a far-reaching debate on Buddhism and Taoism. Many Daoists failed in their debates. They shaved their hair on the spot as promised, changed their doors and transferred to Buddhism. The third Daoist guard was at Dongshan Temple in Potu Mountain, where he did not choose his routes and opened the door of the Dharma, secretly escorting a young monk down the mountain to a ferry. When Qin Pingon heard this, he nodded lightly. Yuan Huajing asked, "Since you are proficient in gold and stone seal carving, you must know that there is a bright red seal in the world, but there is no text." Qin Pingon said solemnly, "Of course, it was a piece of pounding rice dropped by that Zen patriarch. Back then he went up the mountain to ask the 5th patriarch and first entered the temple to do rice-pounding labor. Because of his thin body, the 6th patriarch had to pound the rice with the waste stone." Yuan Huajing didn't hide it and simply told the truth, "This seal is in this temple. This matter is extremely concealed and there is no official record of Dali, but Cui Guosher mentioned it casually back then, and the speaker had no intention of listening, so Yuan Huajing wanted to come here to try his luck." Qin Pingon asked, "Does it have something to do with your hidden life flying sword?" Yuan Huajing seemed very candid. "It's not some relationship but the concern." Qin Pingon was a little surprised, but since it involved Yuan Huajing's fundamentals of Taoism, he didn't ask any further questions. He and the descendants of the Yuan clan of the Upper Pillar Kingdom are neither enemies nor friends. Although the relationship has eased after a few more conversations today, the friendship is not that good in the end. Yuan Huajing was silent for a long time and suddenly said, "I seem to have 2 flying swords of my life, but in fact one of them is an imitation sword, and it came from the hands of Cui Guosher." Qin Pingon was lost in thought. Yuan Huajing asked, "I'm asking you about something and it's optional to answer or not. That dragon slayer, you don't know the path of the 14th realm? Can you tell me?" Just because of the existence of this sword cultivator for 3,000 years, all the descendants of dragons, daffodils, and all those who have the hope of achieving the true dragon Tao have not dared to cross the Thunder Pond for 3,000 years. How long is the Taoist age? Don't you always dare to walk in the water? Wasn't it because he was afraid that the sword would go into the air and pass through Dongting again? Qin Pingon regained his senses, shook his head and said, "It's too taboo to share the secret with you." Yuan Huajing nodded. Qin Pingon said, "That imitation sword is an imitation of the flying sword of my brother's life, right?" Yuan Huajing smiled and said, "Guess." "Damn, it's really comfortable to learn the yin and yang of this young hidden official." Qin Pingon didn't care and smiled. "Yuan Jianxian has only learned a little bit. What is there to be happy about? There is a long way to go and we will continue to work hard." It was quiet outside with cypress trees in front of the courtyard. Sort of Coming Chapter 1026. At the top of Splashing Mo Peak, Chao Tianjun looked up at the sky and asked, "Master, is Zhou Xian the right way?" Lu Chen knew the result without looking up at the sky, nodded and said, "It's done. There are 14 more monks in Taoism, luckily even." Chao Rong didn't look back for a long time. Lu Chen whispered, "Old Xiuzai is a good teacher, no wonder he prefers closed disciples. In this matter Qin Pingon is most like his old scholar." Wen Sheng's line of incense is not very popular. Among the several direct disciples, Cui Yu and Qi Jingchun are not ordinary in terms of learning. As for Zuo and Jun Qian, they are relatively inferior and they do not like to reason with others. Among them, Cui Yu has only a few so-called disciples, only a handful of them can be counted on one's fingers, and they are far from being a peaches and plums. After a long time I went to Lizidongshan and became a Mr. Mengguan, so if you want to be a good teacher, Qin Pingon is indeed the most like an old scholar. The mountain is high and the moon is small and the moon is small and he jiao jiao. Chao Rong couldn't help but sigh. No one can surpass Mr. Wenxing's protection. As a direct disciple of Lu Chen, Chao Rong and Wenxing have a very good relationship. Otherwise it would be impossible to ask for a monogram from Cui Yu. In fact, not long after the establishment of Xianxia Academy, Chao Rong listened to it. Qi Jingchun's lectures have benefited a lot. One time when he left the customs at Lingfei Temple, he was very quiet and moved. He went down the mountain and went to the sea to travel to the pond occupied by Mrs. Tundun. The latter just asked the Taoist heavenly monarch if he knew Pei Min's whereabouts. Chao Rong replied that he didn't know, nodded left and right without any extra greetings. Chao Rong was about to ask why he was looking for that person. Senior Pei, one of the 3 great masters of Haoran, was already thousands of miles away in the blink of an eye. In an unexpected encounter at sea, the 2 men of Taoism ended up talking about less than 10 words. At that time Mrs. Tundun, who was nicknamed Qing Zhong, hid in the distance timidly and only dared to show up when she left and right. She had obviously suffered from the sword cultivator. Sure enough, according to rumors, Wen Sheng's second disciple had a bad temper when he was studying, and his temper became even more irritable after practicing swordsmanship. Lu Chen said, "Humans, if you don't love your relatives, how can you be transitory?" Chao Rong asked cautiously, "Master, can we return to Haoran then?" Lu Chen raised his voice abruptly and in a resolute tone he said 3 words, "What a big question." Chao Rong was stunned and waited for the next paragraph. It's just that Shizhuan didn't know why, as if he had been immobilized, standing like a wooden man for a long time. Chao Rong knew that his question was destined to have no definite answer, and turned to ask a more pragmatic doubt. "You after Xian He Dao and Wu Shuangjiang, who was removed from the palace at that age, which Taoist method is higher or lower? After all, these 2 are new monks who have entered the 14th realm. The younger generation in the 14th realm, together with a trader from the Great Wall of Sword Qi, took up the post of a hidden official, Shao Tan. However, according to some gossip on the mountaintop, Shao Min and the Dragon Slayer, although they are both 14-level sword cultivators, are not pure." Lu Chen shook his sleeves and pointed towards the void, as if deploying troops in a battlefield. In an instant he moved more than a dozen kinds of immortal brews from the secret wine cellars in the mountains of one continent. Lu Chen asked Chao Rong to pick a pot of his own, but Chao Rong didn't know what to do. He liked drinking and declined the kindness of his master, so Lu Chen picked out a pot of spring sleepiness wine from Yunxia Mountain Zhenjianfeng, waved his sleeves again, and the rest of the wine returned to its original place. Lu Chen lifted the mud seal and lowered his head to sniff. Worthy of being a good wine brewed by a good wine friend. I heard that Huang Zhongho is now the new owner of Yunxia Mountain. It is gratifying to congratulate him. He turned around and went to the door to congratulate him. He smiled and said, "How high is Taoism? Are you good at fighting?" Chao Rong nodded. Lu Chen rubbed his chin with one hand and shook the jug with the other, with a look of embarrassment on his face. How can I say this? There are roughly 3 ways to combine paths. The time and place are favorable to people. Fu Lu Yushuan walked a time of day road. The number of combined roads of Wu Shuangjiang was temporarily covered by clouds and fog, and it was not known to everyone. On the Baiyujing side, Taoist officials who were proficient in yin and yang. After doing some deductions, it was only because Wu Shuangjiang was too talented and his aptitude for Taoism was too good, that Baiyujing Daoist could only use the most stupid method, poor algorithm, first rule out the geographical advantage and then rule out the weather bit by bit and finally still giving a dozen possibilities. The key is that during this period Baiyujing's third headmaster helped a lot of disadvantage, making that call of Taoist officials a huge and heavy workload. At least doubled. The level of killing power of Qi practitioners under the 14th realm is still very good to judge. The depth of the accumulation of spiritual energy, the development of Qi palace, the types of magical powers mastered, the number of magic weapons, the combination of natal objects, whether there is a pressure box bottom the killer's trump card, the hidden unique skills. Most of them can be quantified and made some paper articles. But once the great cultivator joins the road and enters the 14th realm, it is a confused account. Lu Qin behaved strangely, pouring out a pot of spring sleepy wine out of the wine pot. The green wine was suspended in the air, condensing into a thin stream of water like a pocket ditch illuminated by the moonlight. Lu Qin said slowly, "Since the old immortal you can monopolize the word talisman on the Howren world side, it is of course a very lethal ascension realm, one of the strongest players similar to chess, not a mediocre or weak player. The hand can be comparable. The most important thing is that the talisman can be transformed into thousands of spells, flying swords, thunder spells, asking God to come down, etc., all of which can achieve similar effects with the talisman. This is the unique innate advantage of the talisman. Xian's ascension realm in any world is the kind of ascension realm that is very capable. As for our palace master Wu under the 14 realms, he also followed a path similar to that of Yu Xian Fulu, quietly learned a lot of techniques and was proficient in everything, not the kind of half-hearted person who is not good at all. So if when both sides are in the ascension realm they meet on a narrow road, and if they have to decide whether to win or lose, I believe the fight will be very good, it will take a long time, and the means will be repeated and it will definitely be exciting." Chao Rong nodded when he heard the words. There are some enduring sayings on the mountain. In addition to the one sword breaks all methods used to praise Jianxiu, there is also, the talisman is the sky and covers everything. Among the main categories of cultivation on the mountain, Jianxiu and Fulu monks are very special existences. Different from playing chess and calligraphy, the threshold is not high and the 2 pulses of Jianxiu Fulu and Qi practitioners, if you do you can do it and you can't do it. Suddenly the surrounding scenery changed suddenly and he came to the foot of a mountain, and it was a misty dawn scene with drizzle. Chao Rong didn't feel surprised. His heart didn't have the slightest ripple, and he regarded it as a reward with the master who had reunited for a long time. The scene is clear, the master and the apprentice are standing in the same place, motionless, but their figure is as fast as an immortal. Chao Rong looked around and guessed that it should be a famous mountain, the essence of heaven and earth, and the spiritual energy of immortal mountains. There are ancient pines on both sides of the road. The robes were dyed emerald green by the color of the mountains, and the sound of thrushes and doves could be vaguely heard in the rain, one after another. The hikers on the mountain road stand in a stalemate and the ropes lead each other. It seems that some dignitaries hold the imperial decree and enter the mountain to visit the immortals. Relying on the cliff carvings along the way, Chao Rong discovered that this place was Quanjiao Mountain. He saw a Taoist priest with an ancient appearance, and he was cultivating with grass at the place where he planted flowers and read, and turned a blind eye to the 2 of them. It seems to be an ancient earth immortal who stays in the world, and after waiting for several centuries he can rely on accumulating yin gong to resolve his form and soar, leaving only the immortal slaughtered in the mountains. Lu Qin continued, "It's just that after joining the Tao, the height and width of the Tao can no longer be inferred. For example, at night or fighting outside the sky, it must be Yu Xian who joined the Dao Xinghe. Once the palace lord regains his identity as a soldier, it will be very scary. Generally speaking, as long as one party is not determined to die, it is difficult for the 14th to completely kill the 14th. The pattern has always been the 14 realms of iron and the ascension realm of flowing water. The 14 and 1 realms, the way of calculating accounts, is completely different from all the previous realms. With you laymen after all, there is no way to tell the real situation inside the door. Just when Chao Rong was about to climb to the top, the scenery changed again and the two sides stood in a flat boat. There are thousands of peach trees on the shore, a red cloud and several white peach trees in between. The flowers are lovely like a girl. Bihu is like a newly polished mirror. The spring has not yet risen, the water is gentle, and the boat seems to be there, a landscape hand scroll in the middle. Lu Chen stood at the bow of the boat with an extra peach blossom in his hand, twisting it gently. Wait, within 1,000 years the fighting between the 14th realms will become more and more frequent. The fall of the old 14th realm, the new 10th, the rise of the 4 realms is a general trend. The 14th realm cultivator is most afraid of the Ascension realm sword cultivator. Of course it's just jealousy, not fear. The Immortal realm sword cultivator can kill the Ascension realm, which is not too unusual. The Ascension realm sword cultivator wants to kill the 14th realm, but it is as difficult as going to the sky. But there are exceptions. For example, on the night ship Wu Gongzhu faced a wave of sword repairs. Among them Qin Pingan's Hedao sword Qi Great Wall, Ning Yao's body a World of Fortune is an unreasonable hand who is messing around. If it was me on that boat, I would not be willing to face such a situation. I just said that if I am not careful, if I am in a fight, I need to confront the boss Xianxia, who is not afraid of being hit by Qin Kingda's sword. This is the first time Chao Rong has heard of such secrets, but he just doesn't know what Wu Shuangjiang secretly sneaks into the Haoran world. What is he asking for? Can't be just to try to see the weight of Qin Yingguan and Ning Yao, right? Or is it that Wu Shuangjiang wants to join forces with Qin Pingan and Luo Peishan, Ning Yao and Wu Cai Tianxia Feishing City to conspire against Bai Yujing? There is a bridge in the distance and the lake surface is like a whole piece of green-colored glass. Chao Rong suddenly found that among the peach trees on the shore, there seemed to be a woman staring at the boat. The woman was standing beside the girl with antlers from a mysterious background. His eyes were quiet and his sleeves were down. They also clearly saw the boat on the lake. Take a look. In an instant the scene returned to splashing Mo Peak and Lu Chen smiled and said, but Palace Master Wu was willing to admit defeat at the time, so of course he showed weakness on purpose. His night sailing trip was just to determine if Qin Pingan was qualified to serve as him. Allies of course will not give up their strength. The first coin appeared in the world, is it just to make someone richer? There are 6 degrees of Buddhism and giving is the first. Good men and women in the world donate money to temples, and the temples donate money to the world. The original intention of this circulation is to make the running water not rot, and the hinges of the household not to be wormed. Speaking of which, Lu Chen twitched the bit of wine that was hanging in the air in front of him with and threw it into his mouth. Daoist, if Daofa is determined solely by fighting skills, does it make sense? Chao Rong nodded, that's right. Lu Chen smiled and said, wrong Taoist priest, the earliest practice was not for fighting, so why? Mountaineering is only for the purpose of ascending to the sky, turning the world upside down and being generous. Lu Chen picked up the piece of wine again, turned his head and smiled and said, Chao Rong, don't be so frowning all the time, the world can't be without peace for a day and people's hearts can't be without joy for a day. Besides, your Immortal Realm foundation is so good, if it wasn't for the teacher to deliberately trick you with your Dao heart and aptitude, you would have already reached the peak of Ascension Realm. The threshold for joining the road is over. After all, I am to blame for this. In fact, Chao Rong is a pseudonym, the founder of Lingfei Temple, the Taoist name Tianrui. Before this life his real name was Zhengzai, who was born in Chidi. It was a small country that had long since been destroyed, and the title of the title has dropped again and again. Therefore there are very few official historical records. Zhengzai used to be a poetry collector who traveled the world. The next moment they came to an official road. On the road, some people rode on horses and carts, some rode donkeys, and there were also people on foot carrying chaihan and charcoal sellers. When Lu Chen stopped, he stood at the door of a post station and Chao Rong watched its plaque named Chobi Post. Lu Chen said an interesting story. Zhang Fenghai, who was imprisoned in Yushu City for 800 years, has left the Yanxia cave of Xingyue Palace. Your master's master promised him that as long as he wins the 3 religions debate, you can leave the Baiyujing Taoist status. Before I came here he just went to Runyue Peak to persuade Wu Fu to work hard and create a sect together. Lu Bixiao, a loose immortal who left the forbidden area with Zhang Fenghai, will assist them. There is also the temporarily unknown teacher Xingyuan. If Zhang Fenghai really negotiated this matter and is willing to go out after hard work, then this sect of only 4 people should not be underestimated. Chao Rong was horrified. Could it be that the Jinhua Palace was banned by Daozu himself and let Zhang Fenghai leave Xianxia cave? Isn't this returning the tiger to the mountain? Who doesn't know the grudge between Zhang Fenghai and Zhang Jiaoyu in Yushu City? It's a recognized dead end. Zhang Fenghai is not an ordinary genius of cultivating Taoism. With this person starting a sect, spreading branches and spreading leaves and expanding his power, even Bai Yujing will still be a big hidden danger. Because in Chao Rong's view, if the wild world attacking the 9 continents of Howren is an exam paper for the 2 worlds, and the question of Howren lies in the word foreign aggression, then the undercurrents of the 14 states of Qingming are surging. We'll also usher in a test paper with the word internal worry. Lu Chen smiled and said, "Don't be nervous. In the eyes of Master, my senior brother Yu is not too much in debt, and he doesn't care about another Zhang Fenghai who is blooming in the wall and fragrant outside the wall. As for the wild world, Zhou Qinggao, who was born in the Jiaoshan account, will not be surprised. He will replace a certain female cultivator who was kidnapped by Gu Ken of Beidasheng, fill the gap in the heavenly stem and become the leader. I believe that these are things that his master expected long ago, and it turns around, but this is the result. Should it be said that the fat water does not flow to outsiders, or is it unnecessary to take off your pants and fart?" Chao Rong nodded and said, "Qi practitioners are not warriors, so it's hard for anyone to have a good reputation." Lu Chen doesn't seem to agree with this statement. "Your uncle Yu, didn't you have a private seal that was stamped on your album?" Chao Rong said solemnly, "When you are the first, Wu Wu is the second." Lu Chen said with a smile, "The literature here is of course not poetry and prose, but the way of speaking, martial arts, and the ability to fight with others and kill. Therefore, the content of the seal on this side is the most authentic portrayal of senior brother Yudo's voice, and it is the first person to do that technique. My way is the highest. As for fighting skills, sorry, you can only fight for the second place." Chao Rong was fascinated by it. Only when Sherbo Yu said this, others would not feel arrogant but only feel arrogant. Lu Chen smiled and asked, "Chao Rong, how would you feel if you were to be your enemy with that Uncle Yu?" Chao Rong smiled bitterly and said, "How dare you, don't even dare to think about it." Lu Chen raised his face. "If it is forced by the general situation, you can't help yourself. For example, one day Shershur had a confrontation with senior brother Yu, had a fight and then was beaten to death by senior brother Yu. You should be a disciple. Oh, you must not avenge your master?" Chao Rong was stunned. Lu Chen patted Chao Rong on the shoulder and taught him a lesson. "How can you be a fool like this? With so many advantages as a teacher, what have you learned?" At this moment, Lu Chen tilted his head and quickly straightened the crown above his head. "The one who can't joke the most is senior brother Yudo. Yudo is famous for fighting with people. Until I met that damned Arya." Chao Rong obviously also thought of this notorious swordsman and asked, "Master, in the 2 battles outside the sky, how much strength did Sherbo Yu face against Liang?" Lu Chen hurriedly used the moving wine technique again, stealing a pot of wine from Changchun Palace, took a sip of wine and then asked back, "Shouldn't you first ask me if I will stay strong?" Chao Rong just thought it was unbelievable. No matter how high Liang's swordsmanship is, he should have no chance of winning against Yu Sherbua, who is known as really invincible. But in fact, in the first fight, Liang was indeed defeated by Yu Di. The fist hit Howren from outside the sky, but in the second match, Yu Sherbua was punched by Liang, and his body fell back to the Qingming world. Lu Chen smiled and said, "This is the essence of the 14th realm fighting technique, but the secret cannot be revealed, especially when it comes to senior brother Yu and the Tao of whoever. I won't tell you any more." Chao Rong was puzzled and looked at Master. Because the senior brother once mentioned a unique hobby of the Master, it is not appropriate for the monks on the mountain to call his name directly, and they will feel it, but the Master is different. Fong he only started chatting when he knew the other party was yelling, regardless of whether the other party was willing to talk or not. But it seems that on Liang's side, Master is reluctant to say, Liang. Lu Chen smiled and said, "You think this guy is tricky with his punches and has no martial virtue. I'm also afraid of him." Afterwards, Lu Chen took Chao Rong to an imperial examination room in the 2nd year of Jiao. He also went to the 9th day of the 5th month in the 31st year of Honggu. Chao Rong saw a small house in the palace with white silk and hanging beams. The women were crying. There are also indifferent women. Afterwards they saw a pine guardian in Ishan. There was a green mountain stream as smooth as the marrow. Lucien stopped here to wash his face with water. On the edge of the cliff, in addition to the pine guard, Chao Rong seemed to see a young hidden official in a long green shirt, standing beside the master, enjoying the sunset together. Lucien sat on the red sun, and the green shirt looked all over the green mountains. Lucien asked coldly, Chao Rong, 10,000 years ago, did you know who was the youngest cultivator of the 14th realm in the world? Chao Rong shook his head. After all, there was no record or any news about this matter. Lucien smiled and asked, what about in 10,000 years? Chao Rong looked strange. It's actually Wen Sheng. Lucien nodded and said, yes, it's this old scholar, just because everyone who sees him likes to call him an old scholar, so it's easy for us to forget that he is someone who can go from one place to 10 within 100 years. The scholars of the four realms, to be precise, began to practice at the age of 40, and attained the Tao at about 100 years old, which is only a few years old. Only because Lao Xiao is in the right place and right, it doesn't seem so shocking to the world, but few know the inside story. If it is not the responsibility of the Confucian temple saint, Lao Xiao is completely compatible with Taoism and harmony. Chao Rong sighed endlessly. When Wenxing left Gongdalin and traveled to Aquarius, he once visited Lingfei Temple and insisted on exchanging copybooks for wine. Chao Rong did not agree, and now he regrets coming. The mountains and rivers moved under the feet of both master and apprentice. In a quaint pavilion, one master and two apprentices failed to notice the arrival of Lu Qin and Chao Rong. Lu Qin chewed a dry cake and squatted beside the chess game. Among the disciples, some people were absent-minded and looked at the eagle on the horizon outside the pavilion. Then came to an ancient poem that is connected with the ocean tide. The melodious sound of the bell seemed to be able to penetrate the hearts of the people. Lu Qin crushed the dry biscuits in his hand and threw them on the ground. The birds came and went for food, not afraid of people. Afterwards they came to a luo shui, rested in a cold bunk on the way, fell into the water. Here the river god seems to hate all people surnamed Sima. Lu Xun was on a canoe lying on his back, wandering in the sky. Let Chao Rong loudly declare his surname Sima. Sure enough, the river made waves, but a bumpy boat never capsized and the river exhausted his means, so he had to go away angrily. Lu Qin and his disciple laughed and said, this is called careful sailing the boat of 10,000 years. In the end, Lu Qin took Chao Rong to a small pavilion on the top of the mountain. The pavilion was humble and there was a stone tablet beside it. The inscriptions were scattered. It was vaguely recognized that there were 6 characters engraved on it. This place has the most haze. There are 100,000 red dusts in the eyes of the melted eyes. The clouds and mists are covered. The city is like a crystal curtain, and the beauty wakes up in the morning to dress up. Lu Qin wrapped his arms around his sleeves and said with a smile, ask the biggest doubt in your heart. Chao Rong looked up at the sky, nodded and said, the patriarch of the 3 religions, especially the patriarch of the disciple, why didn't he stop that person? Lu Qin smiled and said, Chao Rong, think about it, is there really no answer for your teacher? Chao Rong turned sideways and slapped his head. This disciple is blunt. I implore master to clear up your doubts. Lu Qin sighed and said, the patriarchs of the 3 sects, the 15 realms and the whole world, they are the 3 most unfree people in the world. As he spoke, Chao Rong found himself standing with his master on the boat on the lake again, but this time they were standing at the stern of the boat. Lu Qin stretched out his sleeves, pointed to the ripples in the lake and said slowly, the patriarch of the 3 sects. It's like being in a world of colored glass, which is literally the kind. It is inconvenient to move so as not to disturb the heaven and the earth. Big trouble, just like when I came to Howren World this time. I was looking for a fish that slipped through the net just because Lu Qin was recognized as the Baiyujing Daoist of the Qingming world, and already belonged to an outsider, so I sometimes suspected of being obedient. There is God's will in the dark, and if you do it intentionally you will pass it by, and if you don't intend to insert a willow, it will create a shade. Chao Rong was silent in thought. But Lu Qin asked again, is the order of the places I took you to visit in the real order? Before Chao Rong could answer, Lu Qin smiled and said, it's like a line of words on a piece of paper. If the order is slightly out of order, you can't recognize the full meaning of a sentence. Lu Qin smiled and said, let me tell you a few inside stories about the 14th realm cultivator. For example, I spent 2,000 years as a teacher trying to remember as many people, geography, and events of the 14th state of Qingming as possible. Having said that, Lu Qin pointed to his head, as a result, I can't bear it here. This is also the reason why Lu Chen reminded Chen Pingan earlier to pay attention to Pei Qian's memory. I found that this road could not work, so I switched to another road, but the previous road was not completely in vain. On the basis of the previous one, Master once tried to visualize the entire human world. It is an instrument and everything is in order. And then filled the tens of millions of gears with various freedoms of reality and nothingness such as deviations and errors. Heaven and earth coexist with me and all things in me are one since they are one. I am the only one with the spirit of heaven and earth. Unfortunately it still failed. The realm and the realm are still not enough. That's why I still lost when I discussed Taoism with the Buddha, and I lost to a truth that I knew for a long time. Even the stupidest exhaustive method can't be successful. Then we can only trace the source, find the one, just like the Master. My heart is at the beginning of things, witness and Taoism survive. It's a pity this one is so hard to find. Lu Chen originally regarded his senior brother Ko Ming as a brand new one in the future. So there was the 10-year stall and guarding of the Lizhu cave. Chao Rong, when you have free time, you might as well take a good look at the roots of Jinghua Shuiyue and Fijian's message. Lu Chen smiled and said, there are thousands of flaws in personal, all of which have their origins. As a master, if you only teach the branches and leaves, the disciples will be very successful. Chao Rong bowed his head and said, the disciple takes orders. Lu Chen asked why. Bai Yi never admits that he is the happiest person in the world. Do you know why? Chao Rong shook his head. Lu Chen sighed. No wonder the old scholar was so partial to Chen Pingan. Seeing that his disciple was not enlightened, Lu Chen had to boast. Of course, Bai also admires my knowledge and mind, and thinks that I am the most carefree person in the world. Chao Rong bowed his head and bowed his hands. The disciple bows to him. Lu Chen muttered, even if I hear you say that, there is no sense of accomplishment as a teacher. I am a little envious of the atmosphere of the Luapa mountain. Chao Rong's face. Lu Chen began to walk down Pomo mountain followed by Chao Rong. Some people say that people who are not bitter don't dare to do things they can't do. They have to split the thorns in their chests and break the barriers in their hearts so that people and I can communicate with each other. This is the world's first happy world. Those thorns and barriers, what do you think they are? It's the Tao and the truth, the etiquette and the law in ourselves and our hearts. Drinking water, don't forget the people who dig wells. 10,000 years ago, if the sages did not have the mentality of altruistic others and the spirit of giving up their lives and forgetting death, it would be impossible for the human world to have the human world that has existed for 10,000 years. Every year the spring breeze is warm, and it will blow the face of the old beauty and turn the head of the young man white. The mountain wind blew on his temples. Lu Chen smiled and muttered to himself, yes, now why do we practice Taoism? The world cannot be without such a king for a day. Lu Chen asked himself and answered, who is this monarch? Chao Rong, remember. It's you, it's everyone. Sword of Coming Chapter 1027. The capital of Yushuan Kingdom, in a courtyard in a rough alley in Yongjia County. The middle-aged Taoist who claimed to be catching demons at night passed by, sniffed and smiled. Before in the alley outside the courtyard, Pindao smelled a herbal scent and then stopped. If Pindao guessed correctly, there are aconite and ginger. Why, are you still a native? Ningji said with a sullen face, how dare you say that he is a Longzhong? But on the way to escape he accidentally found a few medicine books from an abandoned pharmacy, and he learned as he walked, but he didn't dare to say that he had learned the fur. The Taoist priest said, if you don't mind, take a look. The young man got up quickly and grinned. What's the point of this, Dao Changwu? Wait a moment, I'll get it now. The grandfather was getting old and sleeping lightly. The teenager crept into the house, took out a homemade camphor wood box, returned to the yard and handed it to the elegant talking Daoist Wu. Qin Pingan took the wooden box and did not rush to open it. He smiled and said, Pindao, guess the medicine book in the box, and the authors of the book are mostly from the Vulcan sect that has emerged in the last 300 years. The young man was stunned, his face full of shock, and said, Wu Daochang is really a of unpredictable prophets? Qin Pingan shook his head and smiled and said, the physicians in Longzhong in this vein are especially good at using jiangfu. According to the herbs you have exposed, it is not difficult to guess that it is not as divine as you think, and it has nothing to do with immortality. Ningji suddenly realized that although this Daoist Wu exposed his own shortcomings, Ningji respected this Daoist priest who never made a fool of himself. If it wasn't for Lu Chendo's breakthrough, Qin Pingon would never have imagined that the emaciated young man in front of him was the one who could make the Confucian temple flourish and move the crowd everywhere to find it. Qin Pingon asked jokingly, "You still know the Vulcan sect?" Ningji nodded and said shyly, "I often sell medicinal herbs to shops. After a long time I heard some opinions from the Longzhong." Qin Pingon opened the box with a smile and picked up the books, thinking that the young man had left his hometown for all these years. With this medicine book he could not only heal himself, but also make money by collecting medicine. However, these books are thread-bound editions printed by book dealers in the market. The engraving is poor and the characters are often wrong. Medicine books are different from ordinary miscellaneous books. The proverb is written in 3 books, and the fish becomes the emperor and the tiger becomes the tiger. Qin Pingon quickly turned a few pages and said with a smile, "It means that a book, no matter how good the original is, if there are too many copies and engravings, it is easy to make mistakes, misses and backwards are inevitable. If you have the opportunity, try to find some good manuscripts, look at them and learn from the secretary to save orthography, and the school clerk to carefully proofread the text and correct mistakes, so as not to be falsely passed on to future generations." Ningji nodded vigorously, silently remembering it in his heart, but when the young man thought about his savings he began to worry. Qin Pingon said casually, "The aconite you picked in spring, in fact it is the same medicinal herb. The time, month and place of the herbs are different, and each has its own name and medicinal properties. This reason cannot be ignored. In the Huangting country of the ancient Shu and the Big Lilong state, it was renamed Chuzhou not long ago, and its medicinal properties are better than other places, and it is especially good to pick and expose it in September every year, but in Chuzhou, it is also called mud aconite, since one side of the water and soil nurtures the other side. The herbs that pay the most attention to the nature of the soil are naturally similar." Ningji's eyes lit up and said, "Daoist Wu, I have only heard of Dali Longzhou before, and I will definitely visit those places in the future." The young man is full of energy and has high ambitions. He wants to read thousands of books and travel thousands of miles. Qin Pingon nodded, put the books back in the camphorwood box and returned them to the boy. He smiled and said, "Life is a long journey, and if you have a rest you can drink a scoop to quench your thirst, which is a good deed. I want to say a few more digressions to you. Since ancient times, doctors of various disciplines have always had many differences, quarreled with each other and scolded people fiercely, but scholars who scolded people are not loud, and the more refined they are, the more mean they are." Qin Pingon pressed the camphorwood box with his palm. "Actually, the difference is not in books but in people. It is not only the climate of the people who take the medicine, but also the personal learning and opinions of the people who take the medicine. Ningji, you can be considered a reader. People who have read a few medicine books, the poor man will ask you a question: who is right and who is wrong in such a quarrel?" The young man pondered for a moment but hesitated. Qin Pingon smiled and said, "If you have something to say, it's not a field test. Pindao is neither a field examiner, nor are you a candidate for the test. Pindao is not a teacher, you are not a Mengtong, and there is no test school. I mean, we are just casually chatting a few words, don't be nervous. Words and words are not only a bridge between people, but also an obstacle and a boundary." Ningji scratched his head and hesitated for a moment. "Wu Daochong, is there a possibility there is no difference between right and wrong, only better and more right?" Qin Pingon smiled and said, "What is the answer? You will find it yourself in the future. In short, if you are a scholar, you can fight with someone to be red-faced. As a human being, you still need to be calm. The young man is thoughtful." The Taoist smiled and teased, "Yo, can you understand such a big truth?" The teenager grinned, "I don't quite understand it. Anyway, I'll remember it first and think about it later." The Taoist stroked his beard and nodded and said in admiration, "Ruzi can be taught." Following the conversation with the Daoist was east and west, the young man became more peaceful before he knew it. Just like in the youth's mood, there is an extra place called Daolongzu. It seems that there is a bookstore in the distance and there are several medicine books in it, but the price is not cheap. They are all waiting for the youth. Traveling and meeting, and on the road where the young man has not yet set off, it seems that there are a few Longzhong arguing on the side of the road, blushing and spitting, which is very interesting. There is also a warm voice on the road, seemingly repeating a sentence. In other words, being a person should be a little calmer. It's just that the impoverished young man named Ningji is unaware of these subtle scenes and thoughts. The Taoist priest said, Meeting is fate. Pindao has traveled abroad since he was young, walking around setting up stalls and fortune-telling, and occasionally being a traveler. Today I will teach you a few prescriptions named Zuaguan and Yuguan. Buzhong Ichi decoction, Yinqiaosen Sini decoction and Zixweden. I will teach you a few of these for the time being. If there is a chance to meet again in the future, I will talk about it later. Hearing this, the young man's face flushed red and he was so excited that he trembled in Mandarin with a little local accent. Wu Daochong, I only know about this Sini soup. The book says that it has the power of warming the middle to dispel the cold, and returning to the sun to save the enemy. The Taoist smiled and said to himself, these recipes more or less need to deal with money since you know the magic of Sini soup. Then Pindao will teach you a roasting method that costs almost no money. In the future, in the place where the miasma is heavy in the mountain, before going up the mountain to collect herbs, first set up a fire at home, wait until you come back down the mountain, turn your back to the fire and bake your back. That's enough. It can connect the governor's meridian and it can also be used to restore yang. The Taoist priest smiled and said, Pindao is an outsider. He has always looked down on money. Yellow and white things are external things, and naturally he is not greedy for your savings. If you feel that you owe something and feel bad about it, it's okay, don't pass it today. You just need to show more kindness and do more good deeds in the future and have a merit and demerit in your heart, and you will pay it back to the world one by one, then you should pay this debt of gratitude. The young man was ignorant, thought for a moment and nodded vigorously. Qin Pingon asked, do you have paper, pen, ink and ink here? Ningji nodded and said, it's all there. When the teenager rushed into the house to get a pen and paper, the Taoist priest raised his head and looked at the alley outside the courtyard. There was a woman passing by the wall. The Taoist priest smiled and pretended not to know. Shui Rui twitched the corners of her mouth and whispered, it's meaningless to be deceived and tricked. She had previously noticed that the Taoist priest sneaked out of the house in the middle of the night. She was bored anyway, so she followed the Taoist priest all the way and came to Yongjia County to see whether he was the flower thief or the gentleman on the beam. Turning 8 turns, the Taoist priest actually came to see the young man. At this moment, a righteous and dignified voice sounded in Shui Rui's ear. This girl, you have misunderstood us, Dao Chong Wu. Shui Rui was horrified, but she remained calm, turned her head when she heard the sound, and saw a shabby Taoist priest in a cotton robe, who was young and looked like a dog. She asked, who are you? The Taoist priest moistened his throat and said, Xiaodao's surname is Lu. The girl can call Daoist Lu not to brag but only to say that the business of setting up a stall and fortune-telling is a business of fortune-telling. Fuwan, plum blossoms etc. are all excellent. Especially the Qigua is a good show, whether it is throwing copper coins, reading words, listening to birds and distinguishing the wind, probably because of the sincerity of the poor. But the gods are the spirits and they all respond. Shui Rui couldn't guess the identity of the other party, so she patiently listened to this Daoist Lu being shameless over there. I don't know if it was an illusion, but she always felt that this Taoist priest who claimed to be surnamed Lu, spoke in a smooth, articulate manner. Yes, with that Wu Di they are clearly the same thing, no wonder they are so familiar. Shui Rui is careful and has carefully looked at the other party's attire. The young Taoist held a Tai Chi bun, wearing a cotton robe, a black bag hanging from his waist, and a cotton wrap slung across the body. Seeing that she glanced at his black bag, the young Taoist said with a smile, it was a gift from an old friend who was a prisoner. It was a treasure when he saw things and thought about people. Sell it. Shui Rui pretended to be surprised and asked, the Taoist priest still looks at feng shui? He looks at the good and bad of the yang house and also the quality of the yin house. Lu Qin shook his head and said, Xiao Dao is not particularly good at this line of work. The word special is very heavy. Shui Rui smiled and said, forget it if you're not good at it. I originally planned to invite Daoist Lu to my house for palms. Lu Qin tugged at the rope of the package and said with a smile, don't lie to the girl, there are several kilograms of dried yellow essence in it. The quality is very good. The key is that the price is cheap and the quality is good. The big deal is to take an extra trip to the mountain road. In the ancient mountain called Xianxia, there was a man of Taoism who told Xiao Dao that taking Huangjing, as long as he got the correct method, he could fly to the sky. Lu Qin looked at the female ghost lingering here. In the world, no matter men and women, people and ghosts, fairies and monsters, live a long time and have many stories. Near the Loaf Gate, beautiful women have met for 1,000 years and I want to see beautiful women for 1,000 years. Shui Rui sneered when she heard the words. Eat a few caddies of Huangjing. Can you get the Dao soaring? Who is not good to learn if you have to learn from Wu Di if you like to set up you will be familiar with it. It's just that Shui Rui couldn't help guessing. Could it be that this young liar surnamed Lu was the person Wu Di was looking for in the capital of the Yushuan kingdom? Judging by the ages of the two parties, could it be Wu Di's illegitimate sons? It's just that the two of them don't look alike. Lu Qianxiao was embarrassed. What was this girl Shui thinking? That Qin Pingan's appearance can only be regarded as Zhou Xian, but the poor road is completely worthy of the word handsome. Shui Rui asked with a smile. Wu Daochong likes to grow flowers in the house and Lu Daochong likes to go up the mountain to pick herbs? Occasionally do it occasionally. After all, curing a disease and saving people involves life and death. If you use it well you will rejuvenate your hands. If you use it badly you will kill with 3 fingers. Lu Chen smiled and said, the girl may not know something. One of the ancestors of our profession once made a rule that he must learn from the past and the past, know the heavens and people and not approach the immortals or the Buddha in his heart, and he must not practice medicine. Pregnancy. She sneered. According to what you said, how many qualified men can there be in the world's Xinglin? The young Taoist was ashamed. Xiaodao is clumsy and clumsy. I really can't say enough about a girl. Since Wu Di came here just to get close to a young man, Shui Rui didn't bother to continue chatting with this guy named Lu in the alley, so she turned around and left. After she turned around, Lu Chen shouted, Miss Shui, please stay. Shui Rui turned her head and found that in the hands of the young Taoist priest, for some unknown reason, there were 2 fresh wormwood that seemed to be stained with rain and dew. She frowned slightly. Where did the object in the other's hand come from? Lu Chen stretched out his hand, handed the mugwort grass and said with a smile, on the afternoon of May 5th I will give you a pair of mugwort, and Miss Shui can hang it at the door during the Dragon Boat Festival this year to ensure safety. Shui Rui squinted her eyes and said with a smile, let's not talk about the local customs of hanging wormwood, just ask Daoist Lu about it. Hanging it at the door can ward off evil spirits and exorcise ghosts? I saw the Taoist nodded vigorously and said, it must be possible. Shui Rui snorted coldly. The way of making money is not as good as Wu Dis. Wu Di recognized that he was a female ghost anyway, and this one with the surname Lu was far behind. The female ghost left quickly and Lu Chen shook his wrist. The 2 wormwood in his hands disappeared and appeared at the door of the haunted house. The wormwood hung in the air and slowly approached the door at a speed invisible to the naked eye. When the land gods saw it, they could roughly estimate that the wormwood would be posted on the gate on time after sunrise on the Dragon Boat Festival. Lu Chen grabbed the low wall with both hands, snorted softly, sighed in his dantian, climbed over the wall and entered, spread his hands in the courtyard and stood still. The Taoist priest shook his sleeves, his face full of smugness. Shui Rui was hiding in a roof ridge and when she saw this scene she snorted. In the hospital, Qin Pingan had already written the few prescriptions for the teenager, and finally for a lame reason he wrote an extra prescription on how to torture the herbs, a total of 3 pieces of paper. Qin Pingan didn't even look at Lu Chen, who slung his parcel across his shoulders and had a blue sack hanging from his waist. As for when Lu Chen arrived and the content of the conversation with Shui Rui in the alley, Qin Pingan didn't know. Lu Chen trotted all the way to hold down the 3 pieces of paper and said anxiously, fellow Daoist Wu, put it away and put it away. What a formality. My generation of Taoist priests is a man of the sky. How can we be generous to others? Qin Pingan's intention couldn't be more obvious, to help Lu Chen with this favor, even if he paid off the debt he owed back then. The young man was at a loss, not knowing who the young Taoist priest who jumped over the wall in front of him was. Just looking at the situation, are you old acquaintances with Dao Chongwu? That's not the bad guy. Lu Chen smiled and said, young man, please go and get another ladle of water. Remember to put it in a white bowl. Ning Ji nodded and went to the kitchen to spoon water with a gourd and a ladle. Qin Pingan sorted out all the prescriptions except the 3 sheets of paper, stacked them into a pile and gently placed them on the bench that was temporarily used as a table. Lu Chen sat on the steps, took the white bowl from the boy's hand, smiled and said, whether it's medicine to practice medicine or going up the mountain to cultivate Taoism, Kung Fu is nothing more than planning on the 2 methods. There are thousands of methods and in the end, it doesn't surpass the 2 methods of yin and yang. Ning Ji was a little embarrassed. He glanced at Dao Chongwu who was beside him. Daoist Wu smiled and nodded, indicating that the young man should not be restrained. Lu Chen shook the white bowl in his hand and said with a smile, Pin Dao Luchan, the Taoist name is Nanhua, and he is one of the headmasters of Bai Yujing. I am here tonight because I want to accept you as a direct disciple. Ningji, you are willing to worship Luchan. Are you a teacher? Ningji was stunned, a little confused. What and what? Some of the words that came out of the young Taoist priest's mouth were all words that some teenagers had never heard of. Only understand one thing, the other party wants to accept himself as a disciple. Ningji blushed and looked at the Daoist Wu again. Only this time Wu Daochang neither nodded nor shook his head. In short, there was no hint. Luchan smiled, put down the white bowl first, raised his hands and clenched his fists. Ningji, guess left, guess right, you can guess. Ningji subconsciously looked at Daochang Wu from the corner of his eyes again, and the latter nodded lightly. The teenager looked left and right and said softly, guess right. Luchan turned sideways, turned his back to Qin Pingon, and spread out his two hands at the same time, each with a seal, and the bottom part was facing Luchan himself. Inside the tour, outside the tour. Luchan clenched his hands again, raised his sleeves and released them again. The two seals slipped into the sleeves and said with a smile, Ningji, look at our Daoist Wu, we are comfortable. Although we wave all day long and seem toiled, in fact his demeanor remains unchanged. This is the so-called master of the Tao in the Book of Immortals and Quirks. His body shape is within the wandering side, and the mind of the Tao is outside the wandering side. Qin Pingon smiled. 3,000 years ago, Luchan, who traveled far away to the Qingming world, said in a book a long time ago, what is a great master? Someone who is not a traveler. Not only is it a very mellow Taoist language, it is possible, just possible, and it also contains a layer of meaning. Pure martial arts become gods, and it is a great master. Qin Pingon suddenly found that a long river of time seemed to be stagnant. The young man Ningji had stood still. Naturally, it was Headmaster Lu's method. Luchan stretched out his hand and brought 2 jugs of wine again. One is woody wine from Shujian Lake Chishui City, and one is Chuansho wine from Gingyun Peak in Yunxia Mountain. At the same time, 3 scrolls of vertical scrolls appeared in the courtyard, all of which were images of Qin Pingon but slightly different. They were a standing sword stove, a 2-finger twisting talisman, and a sword on the back. In the past years, the young man in the mud bottle alley, in the future years away from home, the foundation of his life, the order, martial arts, talisman and swordsmanship. It is first to learn boxing to save one's life, then to practice talisman, and then to practice sword to climb high. This Ningji is naturally suitable for practicing talismans. In fact, he can practice anything and there is almost no threshold because as long as he wants to learn, chance will come to him just like you are here tonight. I have to follow already. After taking this as his opening remarks, Luchan paused for a moment, pointed to the vertical scroll of Qin Pingon's twisting talisman, and said with a smile, it is a lantern-bending talisman. It is really suitable for us, people. Afterwards, it was like watching flowers on a horse, and what I saw in my eyes were pictures of Qin Pingon using different talismans in different years and scenes. Back then, when Qin Pingon practiced boxing on the ferry on the underground river, he would write a tranquilizing talisman for concentrating and calming, and the purifying and cleansing talisman that is also located on the first few pages of the Book of Pills. Whenever the night falls, the straw shoe boy walks over the mountains and mountains, and he will also sacrifice a yang lantern charm to determine whether there are ghosts and evil spirits in the surrounding mountains and rivers, and use it to seek good luck and avoid evil. Traveling on the road, the mountains and rivers are far and wide, fighting with people and fighting against the enemy, or the square-inch amulet that can shrink the earth's veins, assisting the gods to beat the drums or encountering ghosts, they will sacrifice the Pagoda Town Demon Amulet. Afterwards, there is a chi trainer who is afraid of heights in the picture with a handsome appearance. It is difficult to distinguish male and female. Luchan said lazily, Lu Tai, your good friend, after parting with you, one of the 4 lotus flower blessed places, Furong Mountain, raised a dog and named him Lu Chen. Qin Pingon looked at the scenes of constantly changing pictures and self, but he didn't think much but felt that he had traveled so many places. The first time I traveled to the Great Wall of Sword Chi, after leaving the Hanging Mountain, Qin Pingon took a cross-continental ferry to swallow a treasure whale and returned to the old dragon city of Aquarius. After entering the Wufu Qi refining realm, you can draw Shanha sword talismans and raining talismans. Although they are still low-grade talismans in the original Book of Elixir, according to the records in the book, they are very magical and have many uses, but they are intentional. Unintentionally, Qin Pingon, who had been able to draw these 2 talismans for a long time, was rarely used until in the Xingyao building where Qing Tong was in town. In an illusion world of phoenix trees, the drought was severe and Qin Pingon prayed for rain. It was the first time that one of these Taoist altar talismans was offered, a rain-seeking talisman that can make the sky and the earth darken and the rain floods. Lu Qin smiled and said, "Actually, these two talismans which you have hardly sacrificed are exactly the ones that intersect with you the most, and the Tao on the mountain is relatively the thickest." In the hometown of Long Kiln where Qin Pingon was an apprentice, a rain teacher once set fire to the fire. It was someone's box of rouge buried in the mud bottle alley that made Qin Pingon seem like a natural avenue of water. On the ferry, it was the first time that you could clearly perceive what the real soul's ding is, because you could finally hear the sound of dripping water clearly when the three souls passed by the Heart Lake. At that time you are busy having fun, but you don't know yet, not all Qi practitioners, even if they are Earth Immortals, can detect that the three souls are crossing the road. Of course, it is possible to thank that sissy's relic. Qin Pingon reached out and took the dangling pot of woody wine and began to drink silently. Lu Qin took the pot of Chuanshe wine and continued to say to himself, "Xianxia sword talisman, you have little experience back then, so you have always been unable to figure out what three mountains are, and you have always been suspicious of why Qi practitioners hold this talisman so that ghosts can be turned away. Respect and take the initiative to give way." The last time he was outside the sky on his way back to Hauran, Li Shixing showed up to help solve his doubts, so that Qin Pingon finally confirmed that he and the Mr. Sanshan Jiuho had some origins, but there was no Taoism in the general sense. It turned out that one of the 4 candidates of the ancient world's 10 richest people in the early years of the Lizhu cave was in the mud bottle alley, but it did not have any intersection with the Fuqian sects in the town. Even now, you still don't know. To be precise, you are not sure what the meaning of the river in this talisman means. The senior brother just stated in the book in general terms that in ancient times there was a who ruled Jiang He who was in charge of slaying evil and destroying evil. Likes to devour 10,000 ghosts. Of course you guessed it, it is related to the gentleman Zhong Kue of Dafu Academy, but I can't believe it, or in other words I am not particularly willing to believe it. Dafu Academy, Dafu and dog days. Naturally it is often necessary to ask for rain. Zhong Kue was born in such a Confucian academy. Do you think it's a coincidence? You and Zhong Kue first met in Hue town on the border of Daquan, but Zhong Kue first revealed his supernatural powers outside of Confucianism. It seems that it was in that buried river, right? You didn't have any idea about the rain charm back then, largely because you didn't refine the 5-element natal object, and then you bought one from Lu Yong, a Taoist priest of Qinghu Palace, at the price of 1 cabbage. Tasteless, but to you the 5-colored golden kitchen stove, which is priceless to you. 5-colored. Isn't this even more coincidental and unfinished, right? Speaking of this, Lu Qin seemed to be a little dry, so he hurriedly raised his head to drink gadong and took a big mouthful of wine. Qin Pingon finally opened his mouth and asked with a smile, "What does Headmaster Lu mean? Do you want to say that these things are waiting for people, or people are doing things?" Lu Qin said, It's easy to ask. If it was Chao Rong, he wouldn't be able to ask such a question if he was beaten to death. Previously he was at Pomo Peak and his disciples were blunt, so I had to look at him to comfort him. Where, in fact, it is. Qin Pingon looked straight ahead and moved the jug slightly towards Lu Qin. Lu Qin tapped the jug in his hand and drank each other. After drinking, Lu Qin wiped the corners of his mouth with the back of his hand, thought for a moment and said, "I really have to worry about who it is. It's not worth making a fuss at all. You me Chao Rong Shui from that haunted house in Chongning County. Rui the schoolboy next door to her Yongjia County here Ningji here." Having said that, Lu Qin put away his magical powers. The 3 vertical scrolls in the courtyard dissipated, and the long river of time continued to flow. Lu Qin squeezed the water bowl with his fingers, but instead of drinking the water himself he unexpectedly handed it to Qin Pingon and asked with a smile, "Why don't you come to accept the apprentice?" Qin Pingon didn't expect Lu Qin to do such a thing and was speechless. The boy's eyes lit up when he heard the words. A pair of eyes shining brightly in the night, like lighting a candle, is the longing and hope of a young man whose heart is full of disappointment. Lu Qin Thief smiled. Qin Pingon glanced at Lu Qin and said with a smile, "Master Lu is so happy?" Lu Qin immediately restrained his smile and put the white bowl back on the steps between the two. My disciple said something from the bottom of his heart, saying that Shanju Qin and Shan's his husband, student and teacher, both of you are good at being good teachers. Yi Chao Rong expressed his admiration from the bottom of his heart that Pindao has a good apprentice who speaks bluntly. Among his own disciples and students, from Cui Dongshan, who was the first to become a student, to Zhou Xian, a closed-door disciple who was regarded by Qin Pingon as his own boxing method. Of course, Qin Pingon was very satisfied with everyone, but at the same time he did not hide his partiality towards them. Having said that, in a sense, Qin Pingon seems to have not received a disciple who is most like himself for the time being. After all, the threshold is not low. If you are a sword cultivator, you can learn boxing and you have to be a talisman trainer. Otherwise, Qin Pingon, who has learned a lot of complicated things and can be regarded as a doorman, can teach everything about preaching, especially in the word personal transmission. He can really get what he wants incisively and vividly. The students and disciples are all so good that Qin Pingon, a gentleman and a master, seems to be more like a hands-off shopkeeper than a mountain leader. Therefore, Qin Pingon has a lot of regrets about teaching his disciples in person. Cui Dongshan doesn't need to teach them, and Chao Qingqing's mentors are actually Chong Qiu and Lu Tai. Besides, for example, teaching Pei Qian boxing, to teach Guozhujiu swordsmanship, who was already a Jindan swordsman when we met again. Even with Zhao Xian, who is by his side now, he started learning boxing and more often he taught himself. After finally meeting a little girl, Qin Pingon wanted to show off occasionally, but what happened to Chai was sighed. Qin Pingon put away his thoughts, turned his head, looked at Lu Qin and asked Lu Qin with his heart. When we were young, did we survive a certain winter? Did we freeze to death in the night? What do you mean? Lu Qin was dumbfounded, silent for a long time, exhaled a long breath and said solemnly, Qin Pingon, don't follow that Xing Juzhong, really listen to my advice. Xing Juzhong is Xing Juzhong, the only one. He will think about proving that he is not a Taoist ancestor. What kind of energy do you, Qin Pingon, get involved in this kind of excitement? Seeing that Qin Pingon didn't speak, Lu Qin raised a hand, put his fingers together and said sadly, Am I so out of touch among friends? Do you still need to make a poisonous oath? Qin Pingon smiled. A pair of golden eyes appeared, but the vision was fleeting. Qin Pingon breathed a sigh of relief and nodded. He could rule out the most unlikely possibility. Before that, Qin Pingon was afraid that he was the key dream of one of Lu Chen's 5 dreams and 7 hearts, Meng Dai. I've been friends for many years, don't mess with my heart. Lu Chen wiped his sweat-free forehead and said cautiously, Actually. Qin Pingon twitched the corners of his mouth and said, Actually, have you ever had a similar idea? Lu Chen blinked. Qin Pingon asked, Since you have thought of it, why not do it? Lu Chen smiled brightly and said, You're not curious. Why did my master walk with you all the way in the town and finally stop at the entrance of the mud bottle alley? Qin Pingon frowned slightly and asked back, Who used to live next door to my ancestral house in Mupin Lane? Lu Chen laughed but just tapped his heart lightly with his hand and said dong dong dong. Sword of Coming Chapter 1028. In a village school, the mountains and rivers depend on each other. The nearby streams are gurgling, the water meets the rocks and the iris is green. Qin Pingon, where his real body was lying on a rattan chair holding a fan in his hand, closing his eyes and resting. The road ends with clouds in the daytime and streams in spring and blue nights grow. Zhao Xian stopped and sat on the bamboo chair next to the eaves. Zhao Xian glanced at the master who was lying on the swinging fan, and for no reason remembered Mr. Zhu's words. The lifespan is uneven. Not only in the sky, self-cultivation and self-cultivation can last forever. Qin Pingon still closed his eyes and said, If you want to laugh, just laugh, don't hold back, but say it in advance. Don't pass on today's affairs to Luopa Mountain, especially don't be heard by Xiaoli. Zhao Xian nodded with a smile on his face, but he didn't laugh out loud in the end, which was considered to save some face for master. The more I think about it, the more interesting it becomes. After all, this kind of thing happened to master. No matter how simple and honest Zhao Xiaxia's temperament is, he can't help but want to laugh. It turned out that during the day there was a mother of Meng Tong in the school and she looked like a savage woman. When she got here, she stood at the door and started to raise her voice, asking her children to go home with her instead of studying here. At that time, when the master asked the reason, the woman just ignored it and only chanted her child's nickname. Meng Tong stood up timidly as if panicked and aggrieved. The woman pulled the child's arm and asked the master to pay on the spot to return the pen for repairing. In fact, the tuition fee was lower than the market price, and much lower than that of the neighboring village. The master didn't get angry, didn't say anything to the woman, just wanted to say a few words to the child. As a result, the woman was annoyed. She began to push and push, but the master just raised his hand to stop it, and the woman began to splash and greeted the master directly. Recalling what happened during the day, Qin Pingon couldn't help but laugh. Probably this is what the book said about Sven sweeping the floor. Zhou Xian asked curiously, "Master, is it really the entrance ceremony of the apprenticeship prescribed by the most holy master himself? The implication is that it is natural that saints also need money to teach?" Qin Pingon smiled and nodded. "It's absolutely true." Zhou Xian endured it but still couldn't hold back and asked, "Master, why did that woman take the child away?" Qin Pingon opened his eyes, thought about it and said helplessly, "Since we can't stop it, there is no way. We can't scratch each other. It's not about boxing. Whoever wins the fight has the final say." Zhao Xian laughed so hard. In the end, the child became the first Meng child to drop out of the village school. The school has only just opened for a few days, so it's not an exaggeration to say that it's a disadvantage to be a teacher. I heard that the long-tongued woman who likes to chew her tongue has been pouring dirty water on the school and the master recently, chasing the wind and dare to say anything ugly. Although Qin Pingon here has deliberately put away all realms' supernatural powers and weather, it is no different from ordinary people, so Qin Pingon did not hear the few times Zhao Xian said hello before, and the girl in the Wind Snow Temple did not hear it. Xiao Yuwei Pavilion, she accidentally came here to control the wind, mistakenly thought that Qin Pingon was pretending to be sleeping on the rattan chair, and deliberately ignored her, which was really the fault of Qin Yingguan. But even so, even if Qin Pingon just stared at him at the time, he would probably be able to frighten the countrywoman who came to mess with her. Interesting is interesting, funny is funny, Zhao Xian still sighed. What a blessing to be able to follow Master to study and work. I heard that many Confucian academies now want Master to give lectures, but Master declined. Qin Pingon shook the fan and laughed to himself. I remember that the first time I met Wei Xian was in a place called Hue Town on the border of Daquan. In the inn we, the founding emperor of Nanyuan Kingdom, have a discerning eye. Unique, I just met, I remember Wei Haoyang's second sentence, that is, the master is so tyrannical in the middle of the winter, how what do you think? Wei Xian is not only good at drinking, but also looking at people, his eyesight is even better. Lu Baixiang and Sui Right are far inferior to Wei Xian. After all, Zhao Xiao wasn't senior sister Pei Qian, nor younger senior brother Cui Dongshan, so he couldn't handle such words. For a while it was a little cold, and then Qin Pingon said two words with little pause for no reason. Knowing that it can't be helped, it's like a life. The moonlight wind has finally fallen. Zhao Xiao was not sure, but he noticed that tonight's master seemed to be a little relieved, especially relaxed. Qin Pingon laughed softly. You should send that letter to Luapa Mountain. Remember to choose a secluded landscape, walk along the way and experience the unusual physique of Wujing Wufu on the way. When you arrive at Luapa Mountain, don't rush back. Let me, the old cook helps to feed the fist, and the location is on the second floor of the bamboo building. Let's talk about the injury. If you feel good about asking the fist, you can get a few more beatings. It's best to learn a few more stakes with Zhu Lian. Guys like to keep secrets. I guess there are a lot of unique skills in the box, but I haven't had the chance to show them. You are also a swordsman, and Zhu Lian is also a swordsman. When you get to the second floor, you can have the cheek to let him shake a few hands. If you can play in the bamboo building, by the way, it is also possible to play in the 6 realms. You don't need to worry about my food, clothing, housing and transportation. If you are worried about this kind of thing, it is better to worry that your boss is not too young or you are a bachelor. Zhao Xiao was on the school's side and had just entered the 5th realm from the 4th realm of martial arts, because it was all within the scope of the body refining realm. Just now, Taoist Wu Di, a Taoist priest, asked Lu Chen about the textual research in the courtyard in Yongjia County, and how Zhu Lian's swordsmanship was compared to that on the right side of Sui. Lu Chen smiled and replied with only 2 words, not low. As for whether it was only higher or lower than Sui right side, or in the eyes of his headmaster Lu, Zhu Lian's swordsmanship attainment was worthy of the word, not lower. At that time, Lu Chen was reluctant to elaborate. You must know that Lu Chen once wrote about the sword. In addition, in Baiyujing Yushu City, he borrowed a piece of land with the city owners Guijia and Shaoxiang to build a private study, which was named Guanqianjianzhai. The 2 main and deputy city lords are both Daomen de Xianxian among the Baiyujing Daoist officials. And Zhu Lian once said that he leaked his mouth, saying that his first time walking around the world was to travel far with a sword. If Zhou Xian was not proficient in swordsmanship, Qin Pingon would not believe it. There are 4 people in the painting scroll of Lotus Flower Blessed Land. Today Zhou Xian seems to be the only one who has not accepted direct disciples. You must know that Zhou Xian is already a martial artist of the limit. Wei Xian and Liu Baixiang, who have contributed more together, are now in the far-flung realm, and the same is true of their fellow villagers. Only Zhou Lian, who has been in Luopa Mountain for so many years, is more interested in replacing the young mountain owner as a steward. On top of the general affairs, he was busy with everything every day, but he only had time to learn martial arts. Qin Pingon didn't know what he was thinking. That's why the 2 sides met in the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom. Don't spare any effort, just ask the boxing heartily and compete with each other. According to the years of learning martial arts, you are 1 year older than me, Qin Pingon, and I am 1 level higher than you, Zhou Lian, in martial arts. Zhao Xuxiao nodded and agreed. Indeed, in the 30 years after Master left his hometown for the first time, almost most of his time was spent traveling far and abroad, and it was not his turn to take care of Master's daily life. I remember Zhou Lian once said that when we cannot be responsible for ourselves, it is difficult to be qualified to be responsible for others. As for the temporary letter delivery, it turned out that Qin Pingon had just written a letter during the day. He originally planned to let Qin Lingjun take it to Luopao Mountain and send it to Qingping Jianzong when he came to wander here next time. The recipient was Chao Qingqing. In the letter, Qin Pingon suggested that the proud student, who was very pleased with his eyes, should take time to go to Tianmu Academy and listen to the lecture given by the deputy head of the mountain. When you. These things, as well as some selfishness, Qin Pingon has always kept the secret from Zhao Xuxia. Zhao Xuxia asked curiously, "Master, it seems that you respect Wen Shan from Tianmu Academy very much?" Qin Pingon thought for a moment, carefully selected his words and said slowly, "How can I put it? Wen Yu is very close to my mind. The image of a scholar in an ideal state. Not only is he strong, but there is a kind of scholar who naturally abandons me. Spiritual, unparalleled in spirit, at the same time very pragmatic, ambitious, meticulous, stable, and always have a strong compassion for the weak. So in my opinion, when you can be worthy of pure Confucianism praise." Qin Pingon smiled and said, "As my husband said, being aspiring and being a gentleman is also a gentleman. When you is this kind of upright gentleman. Maybe he was infected by the mood brought by the change in Master's mood." Zhao Xuxiao rarely joked. "How about the comparison between Mr. Wen Shanchong and Mr. Liu of the Tai Hui sword sect?" Qin Pingon lost his laugh, gently fanning the fan with a relaxed attitude, squinting his eyes and smiling. "It's not quite the same. I'm more comfortable with Liu Jiuxian and am more restrained with Wen Shanchong." Zhao Xuxiao was a little shocked. Master has never seen a lot of wind and waves, and he feels restrained when he gets along with others? Although Zhao Xuxiao does not belong to any mountain in Luopa Mountain, but the atmosphere of Luopa Mountain is there. Everyone is more rude and a lot of news is exchanged, just like no one is a marginal person. So he knew very well that every time Master went out for a long trip and returned to Luobao Mountain, it seemed as if he had brought a big bag of stories. After returning to his hometown, no matter what magnificent things he encountered, he seldom followed it personally or by watching. Who repeatedly refers to someone. It is only said that the Master is here to teach, and under his Zhao Xuxiao when you has been mentioned many times. The first time Qin Pingon was warm was on his own Fengyuan ferry. Although it was the first time they met, the 2 sides didn't talk much, but Qin Pingon was on Zhao Shuxia's side and made no secret of his admiration for this academy gentleman. For example, when you had an idea that he was going to use a certain mountain sect as an example. The first condition was that the number of people in the Zhushirtang must be an odd number. Before that, there will be a smaller internal discussion to judge whether some important resolutions need to be put on the agenda. The number of personnel is also an odd number, and it is guaranteed that there will not be a situation where the number of people with positive and negative opinions is the same. In this way, any decision that is put on the table, yes or no, can be passed quickly. Regardless of whether it is the 2 chambers that are vaguely divided into size, inside and outside. If you always hold objections, you can expressly request that your negative opinions be recorded in a register, and keep a record for future checking. At the same time, a role similar to historian is set up, and the responsibilities are similar to that of daily life. Qin Pingon stretched out his 2 fingers and raised them in a gentle circle, When you said the whole world shows a spiral upward trend, the lines are like horns, they are all going up, not just relying on some strong people to lead the way, we also need to rely on a stable and flexible system. He thought that the quality of the world cannot always depend on the decisions of a small number of people, and there needs to be more people who can be responsible for themselves. We can correct mistakes at any time. We are not afraid of making mistakes, we are afraid of procrastination, and we use inaction to cover up the neglect of government. We must make every mistake and correction become a small step in the rise of the world, and it will become a road over time. People can walk. In this way, just like the Academy provides a well-documented manuscript and a template for the secular, and then the more common resolutions are passed, the more cases that can be read from the beginning, the more problems found, and the corrections are like proofreading. Words, the basics are becoming more and more rare, and eventually the world will be stable, but in this process, it will definitely be. Qin Pingon sighed softly. It takes 10 years for trees and 100 years to cultivate people, and there is a long way to go. Zhou Xian said with a sullen face. Master told me this. Would it be playing the qin to a cow? Qin Pingon asked with a smile. Is it annoying? Zhou Xian shook his head and said, of course not. Qin Pingon nodded and said, when we know more wise one by one, it will make us more patient and calm. If a person can be calm, it means that he is successful in cultivating the heart, and it will not be easy to deal with things in the future. People say angry words and say heavy words. The three teachings and the knowledge of 100 schools of thought seem to be based on the word heart, and they work hard even to the point of death. Zhou Xian has a deep understanding of this. On the first floor of the Luoluo Mangosteen, it is both a residence and a study. As one of the clones, Qin Pingon in green shirt, is reading at night with the lights on, flipping through a booklet repeatedly. The content is the summary of the last chat with Wenyu. The 8 booklets vary in thickness and content. There are not only geographical records like landscape travel notes, but also excerpts from Buddhist precepts and Taoist classics, as well as personnel and knowledge of Yushan, which is based on Zhuji and so on. If the talisman paper avatars attached to the minds of 7 revealing, 2 concealing and 9 grains are regarded as co-editing a book, then Qin Pingon, who stays in Luopa Mountain and does not move, is somewhat similar to the chief inspector or chief editor. This Qin Pingon walked out of the house, hung a sword talisman, and Yu Feng went to Huaihuang County. According to the resolution of the Confucian Temple in the last meeting, the ministers of the rights of various countries in the future must all be from the children of the 72 Academy. In Wen Ye's view, scholars who become officials must not only have a solid knowledge of personal self-cultivation, but also be proficient in law. Law and arithmetic, there is a pragmatic technique of economic benefit to the people, not only must be able to be sincere, continuously enrich knowledge, but also be good at solving, or at least understand the operating principles of specific money, litigation and other matters. At that time when Yu and Qin Pingon gave an example. In the courtroom, the Ministry of Rights and the officials of the Ministry of Household quarreled. One could not only talk about etiquette and morality, and the other would talk about their own money bags. This was a chicken and duck talk. Since the students who enter the academy are the well-deserved seeds of reading in all countries, the academy has to shoulder the responsibility of cultivating the seeds. The academy should focus on researching more than a dozen issues, open up a wide range of opinions, and allow Confucian scholars to participate in policy theory. As far as I know, instead of reading only my own books, I bury myself in the academy and do my own knowledge. The family law of a country's ancestors and even the Confucian temple rituals, whether it is unchangeable or can be revised, whether there is a possibility of perfection, and how to improve it, I have been able to understand it clearly during my studies in the academy. Make sure that everyone knows, even if they still have their own answers, then seek common ground while reserving differences for the time being, and leave it to the students after they leave the academy, in the family, in the court, and the specific personnel they will encounter in the future, to corroborate or overturn their earliest views. To talk about any truth, there must be a series of rigorous and meticulous inference processes, and any point of view must be supported by sufficient reason. When you said that scholars in the world are rational like writing a book, the argument is only the title and the preface. The argument is the bibliography and the main text chapters. Step by step, every link can stand up to scrutiny. Ambition is emotional, romantic, and can be lofty and boundless. Doing the things at hand is rational, it must be done in order, and the context must be clear. In addition, when you also said that he intends to take the lead in the academy and cooperate with the imperial courts of various countries to compile a general medicine book in an official capacity, and to enhance the status of hundreds of Chinese medicine practitioners. He will also compile the famous reforms in Haoran's history, regardless of success or failure, the evaluations and different opinions of the time and later generations, into a book for the reference of future scholars. This coincides with many of Qin Ping's views. And obviously Wen Yu is more far-reaching and careful than Qin Pingon. Probably this is the so-called instant confidant. In addition to being a Confucian upright gentleman who served as the deputy mountain chief, Wen Yu was actually a real sword cultivator. Just like the genealogy monks in the Qingming world, of course they are all Taoist priests. But it doesn't prevent them from having their own cultivation paths and having other additional identities. For example, Xuandu Guan is the line of Daomen sword immortals, and Huayong Palace of Difei Mountain has a side branch of sword cultivators. Wen Yu joked with his friend Wang Zai, who was a guest in his study before, saying that if he went to the Great Wall of Sword Qi he would definitely be able to enter the Summer Palace. This is not Wen Yes words that deliberately belittle his friends and elevate him. This Qin Pingon quietly came to the main street of the town. The shopkeeper behind the scenes was Aunt Feng's restaurant. At this time the lights were still brilliant and the voices were noisy. All the way to Mud Bottle Alley, Qin Pingon stopped for a moment at the entrance of the alley, then walked slowly in the alley and walked to the door next to the ancestral house, facing the house that seemed to have been abandoned since he can remember, and turned to the left side of the alley. Looking somewhere, Qin Pingon squatted down, his arms wrapped around his sleeves as if there was a young child rolling on the ground, and then glanced to the right, the earth outside his ancestral house, but there was a rouge buried under it. Box. Just like the question asked by Taoist Wu Di and Lu Chen, there are so many things in the world, is it man-made or God-given? If everything is determined by God, it is an unchangeable destiny. But if not, then there are inevitably many coincidences on the road of life and the gains and losses are up to you. Listening to Lu Chen's tone, it seems that most of them are the latter. Qin Pingon hesitated for a while and followed Lu Chen's previous way of climbing over the wall, with the courtyard door behind him. After walking a few steps he wanted to push open the door in front of him and go inside to see if there were any cables, but he just stretched out his hand. Then stopped, thinking about whether to give up, turned over again and entered his house with one hand against the wall, took out the key to open the door, sat at the table, took out a fire certificate from his sleeve and lit an oil lamp. This, Qin Pingon, is actually the scholar he once had in his mind. He studied and studied when he was young. After leaving the school after a lot of hard work, the elderly had their own study. It is probably the kind of life that parents hoped for Qin Pingon: peace, food and clothing and a family and a business. Some simple truths. Parents actually do not need to repeatedly nagging with a child. Be kind to others, be polite, and when you meet your elders on the road, you can't be a little mute, you have to call people. Be an honest person and do things according to your duty. Because of how parents and elders do, children will always see the truth when they are next to them. Maybe this is the real homeschooling. At the village school, Zhou Xian asked, "Master, why do you want to be an ordinary person?" Qin Pingon smiled and said, "Opening a library and teaching at the foot of the mountain is to teach and educate people, and what to do with the magical powers on the mountain." Zhou Xian was speechless. Qin Pingon sat up and murmured, "Teaching and educating people cannot be separated. If one day the school is just teaching, the parents and elders who send their children to the school as well as the masters think so, and there will be problems." Qin Pingon was silent for a moment, then smiled and said, "I also have selfish intentions and want to learn from Mr. Qi." Hearing the master's statement, Zhou Xian immediately understood the words in his heart. It seems that the master has always called the younger brother of Wensheng's lineage Mr. Qi, not senior brother Qi. It was before, it is now, and it may be so in the future. Qin Pingon suddenly smiled and said, "Under the tree, you may have a junior apprentice soon, 14 years old, surnamed Ningji. It is only possible for the time being and cannot be said to be the case because before that Ningji had another apprentice to choose. Master's process, Lu Chen or me wait for him to calm down, think for a few more days and then make a decision." Zhou Xian mistakenly thought that he had misheard. "Who?" Qin Pingon said, "You heard right, it's Lu Chen." Previously in Yongjia County, Qin Pingon explained the importance of Lu Chen and Bai Yujing's arguments to the young man in detail, using metaphors that many young people could understand. Of course Ningji was startled, but Lu Qin and Qin Pingon both noticed one thing. The young man did not have the slightest joy, instead his face was pale and he fell into a huge instinctual fear. When a person has a deep-seated distrust of the world, it must come from all kinds of hardships on the road of life. The young boy who has gone through a lot of love and affection parted ways and died, so his state of mind is gray and there is almost no color at all. Lu Qin wanted to follow the gourd and draw a scoop, learn from Qin Pingon and explain in detail to Ningji. Qin Pingon Yingguan Luopao Mountain Master, the future national teacher of the Dali dynasty, a close disciple of Wensheng's lineage, and the future teacher Ningyao and others said. It's just that Qin Pingon couldn't help Lu Qin to do so and gestured to Zhang Zhang with his eyes to teach him not to cheat. Originally, Lu Qin asked the young man to bring a bowl of white water and replace the tea with water. According to Lu Chen's intention, as long as Ningji nodded and agreed at that time, he would drink water again. Even if Lu Qin drank the apprentice tea, he and Ningji had the apprenticeship status. This glorious trip, the merits and virtues are complete. Of course Lu Qin can return to the Qingming world and Baiyujing. The reason why Lu Qin was suddenly enlightened was that the old trick was repeated. If he wanted Ningji to switch to Qin Pingan's sect, of course, Master Lu had his own plans. First, choosing Ningji as the direct disciple involved too much cause and effect. It wasn't that Lu Qin couldn't handle it, but he was always lazy. Like his disciples Chao Rong, He Xiaoyang and Lu Qin, they were all very casual when it came to preaching in person. After they were accepted as disciples, they threw away a few spiritual books, taught them a few sects and then let them go. What's more, Ningji's background determines that the young man is different from all the direct disciples before Lu Qin. Lu Qin must be brought by his side until the young man is in the top 5 realms. It can come to an end. Completely restless. Furthermore, the benefits of accepting young people as disciples are actually not as big as imagined. Lu Qin has already made some rough deductions outside the alley. There is no Taoist friend on the road, and it is indeed very likely that he will become a very young monk of the 14th realm. Then when he has a teacher, even if Lu Qin preaches personally, Ningji's Dao achievement has begun to decline. Will there be 14 realms in the future? It's about to make a question mark. Therefore Lu Qin neither wanted to make mistakes and recruit a mess that must be done by himself, nor did he want to make mistakes and delay Ningji's practice. In fact, Lu Qin had 3 candidates in mind who were fully qualified to be Ningji's preaching mentor: senior brother Ko Ming, Li Xing and Baidiqing Jing Juzhong. But the senior brothers have not yet joined the Tao, and the ritual and sage can be said to be a matter of time, and Jing Juzhong, after all, is a giant of the devil's way. Even if he dares to send it over, the Confucian temple will not agree. Qin Pingon was ranked 4th. As a result, the boy was bored for a long time before he opened his mouth and asked Lu Qin a question. Since Daoist Lu has such a distinguished status, why did he accept himself as a disciple? Lu Qin was choked for a moment, and he was so wronged. Could it be to tell the truth openly and honestly with the young man, saying that your child was born from an unhealthy background, has a turbulent fate, was born to collect debts, and is destined to be a troublemaker who has caused the Confucian temple to have headaches for many, many years? Someone has to watch over you. And this person must have a high enough realm, a good enough patience, and a preaching skill and method that is mellow and etiquette, so that he can lead your crooked neck tree into the right path little by little and practice the right path. Otherwise, your kid, as expected, will be a surefire, extremely young cultivator of the 14th realm, who will bring a huge unknown to the vast world and the wild world. Lu Qin looked resentful, raised his chin and nodded towards Qin Pingon. Ningji, don't you have anything to ask Dao Chongwu? The young man asked Qin Pingon. Daoist Wu, are you willing to accept me as your apprentice? Lu Qin almost spat out a mouthful of old blood on the spot. It's like a person who first asks others how the weather will be today next year, and then asks another person if the sky is clear and the weather is good today. Can the 2 questions have the same difficulty? Can this be considered a bowl of water? Lu Qin was so angry that he recognized this disciple directly. In the dark of night, on a rural road, a young Taoist priest led a thin boy towards the school where Qin Pingan lived. I made an appointment with Qin Pingon earlier and asked Ningji to think about it for a few days. Lu Qin felt that it would be better to bring the young man to see the real Taoist Wu Di, so he took Ningji and used the shrinking method. In the blink of an eye, just as Ningji stepped into the alley from the yard, he found himself walking on a completely unfamiliar yellow mud road and asked, Master Lu, isn't Taoist Master Wu a Taoist priest? How can he be a teacher? Lu Chen smiled and said, being a good teacher is a stinky problem that cannot be corrected. I always want to be a good person and make the whole world better, even if it is a little bit better. Ningji asked, is the Luzhang Church thinking about making the world better? Lu Chenxiao was embarrassed. I'm a lazy person and I don't particularly care about the ups and downs of the road I walk on. A long time ago I wrote a book. Everything I want to say to the world is in the book. Ningji said, I used to be on the road and heard an old saying, you should die in the water, not on the shore. Is it because the old gods like Lu Zhangjiao have seen too many things they don't think about it? To save that person I will only watch the life and death of ordinary people like us, and feel that it is all self-inflicted or simply don't bother to watch. Lu Chen smiled and said nothing. As expected of Ningji, he seems to be a boring gourd. As long as he asks, the question is always so tricky and big. Lu Chen noticed that the boy was in a dull mood and asked, how about you? Before meeting Wu Daochang and me, did you think about how to live? Ningji whispered, live well, take revenge for revenge and repay your kindness. Lu Chen asked, you and Daochang Wu have only met for the second time, so why are you so close to him? Aren't you afraid that you will meet a bad guy with ulterior motives? It was also the first time for the young man to think about this question. After thinking for a moment, he answered honestly. The boy hesitated for a while and then asked in a low voice, Wu Daochang, just like Headmaster Lu, did you come looking for me from the beginning? Ningji is not a fool. Since he can let a headmaster by Yujing visit the alley in person, there must be an unknown reason. Lu Chen shook his head and said, it's not like me, he met you, it was just a very accidental encounter. Daochang Wu has similar tempers as you, and the reason why he appeared in the capital of Yushuan is just like you said just now. That sentence belongs to repaying kindness and revenge for revenge. The boy's mood instantly improved. Sure enough, I guessed it again. That Wu Daoist is different from Headmaster Lu. Lu Chen was so angry. Taoist Wu Di is just an avatar of Qin Pingan. As a result, on the side of the youth, it seems that a fart is fragrant. People are more popular than people. The poor Taoist reports his identity as soon as they meet. How can he not treat people with sincerity? It is said that there is true love in the world. So Lu Chen smiled and asked, then if Wu Daochang had the same original intention as mine, will you be disappointed when you find out the truth? Ningji thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, I won't be disappointed. Perhaps instead it will feel like a kind of luck that must be cherished. It's like a poor worm, afraid of poverty. One day he was so hungry that his eyes dazzled, and suddenly he picked up a piece of silver on the ground. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and brought a pot of wine from the Qingmei Temple in Nantang Lake. Lu Chen took a sip of the green plum wine, but his teeth were sore. The teenager was surprised. Lu Chen asked, is it easy to learn this immortal technique, whether you want to learn it or not, and you can drink without spending money in the future? The young man shook his head, but he still swallowed the words to his stomach. Even if you are Lu Chen, who is said by Daochang Wu as a person who cannot be bypassed by scholars in the world, and is the head teacher of Bai Yujing, it's not good to jump over the wall casually, and it's even worse if you don't give money for stealing things. Lu Chen smiled and asked, Ningji, haven't you stolen anything while fleeing this way? Ningji answered honestly, I've stolen it more than once or twice, but it's really impossible to live. Lu Chen sighed, no wonder you and Wu Daochang have a good relationship. Ningji wondered, Wu Daochang also came from a bitter background. Has he stolen something? Lu Chen answered the question, many times when you make a mistake but know it, there are two possibilities. One is to get used to it and don't bother to deceive others, just learn to use excuses to pave the way for happiness. Build a dam so that there will be no floods and extremes. That's why the most holy master said don't be afraid to change it. Ningji said, that's why you stole it too? Then the teenager added, Wu Daochang must have been very hard when he was a child. Lu Chen had no choice but to raise his head and raise his hand again, taking a sip of green plum wine. Glancing at the young man beside him, Lu Chen has occasionally regretted over the years, regretting that he didn't throw Qin Pingan directly into a sap and sack and throw it to Bai Yujing, whether it was thrown in Nanhua City, or as a senior apprentice, taking apprentices on behalf of his teachers. Maybe not so much trouble now. Noticing the strange look in the headmaster Lu's eyes, Ningji slowed down intentionally or unintentionally, but soon returned to normal. This is a mysterious intuition. The heart of harming others is indispensable, and the heart of defending others is indispensable. Moreover, the young man was indeed using his own method to carefully observe a Baiyujing headmaster. Lu Chen nodded secretly. The so-called cultivator is a genius, but that's it. Lu Chen asked, "Did you go to school when you were young?" Ningji said with a sad expression, "I only learned a few dozen words after I attended the school for a few days." Lu Chen asked again, "Since there is a school, it means that the family is in a good situation. On the first day of school, have you ever worshipped the hanging statue of the most holy teacher and kowtowed to the master of the school?" Ningji shook his head and said, "I was very young at that time and my uncle was temporarily serving as a teacher. It was not considered a formal admission, so I didn't pay attention to it." The secular clan school at the foot of the mountain is generally set up in the clan ancestral hall, and children with foreign surnames are not accepted. Private schools like Qin Pingans are not limited by surnames. They mainly teach children to read and write. Most of them are long-term schools. The school starts after the Lantern Festival in the first lunar month and ends in winter. The requirements for the teacher's knowledge are not high. There are also those teachers who are interested in starting a career. They have more knowledge and more ink. They will pass the exams while teaching. Many of them teach in the schools or scriptures of wealthy portals, and most of them are famous local teachers who are Confucian scholars. There are long courses and short courses. Generally, on the first day of school for Mengtong, those with wealthy families, or those with a little more cultural education, must please invite the tablet or hanging statue of the most holy teacher with the county government office and the county teaching decree. Let the children kowtow and bow to the most holy teacher and the teacher who is in charge of teaching, even if they are enrolled. Lu Chen stretched out his finger, used his hand as a pen in the air and quickly wrote 2 words. "Do you recognize it?" Ningji nodded and said, "Vulgar immortal." Lu Chen smiled and said, "People plus grains are a common word. People in the mountains are immortals. Is it easy to understand? People eat whole grains and immortals refine their qi in the mountains." Ningji silently memorized these 2 words, these sayings. Lu Chen said, "It's agreed in advance, it's not digging or bragging. If you take me as your teacher, you will be more free. If you recognize that Wu Daochang as your teacher, you will find yourself, at least a part of yourself, one day. Takes a long time to hide from someone." Ningji asked curiously, "Who?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "In the future you will find the answer slowly by yourself." Ningji kept it in mind, looked up and asked, "Is the school where Daochang Wu teaches soon?" Lu Chen said, "It's already here." The young man stepped out and in a trance the night turned into day and the sound of the book was loud. Ningji looked around. It was actually outside a school. The teacher in the room was a strange man in a blue shirt and long coat. But the young man recognized at a glance that the man was Wu Daochang, who did not wear Taoist robes. Lu Chen smiled and said, "There are spring water in the south and the north, and the willows are the most gentle. It's a good place with beautiful mountains and rivers. It's really a good place to cultivate the mind and to teach the preaching and teaching." There was a gurgling stream next to the school. Lu Chen listened to it and nodded. Famous paintings should be read as poems, and the sound of books should also be heard as the sound of water. Lu Chen walked into the house with the ignorant teenager, went straight to the end and explained with a smile, "Don't worry, Daochang Wu can't see us and we won't disturb his lecture. According to the mountaintop, this is called it's like being in a no man's land." Ningji stood almost against the wall, still very cautious. Lu Chen leaned against the window with a weary attitude. He smiled and said, "By the way, Daochang Wu's real name is Qin Pingon, Dong Chen Ping 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 Ping." Ningji nodded. This market boy has never had the chance to know that this very common name is not common. Inside the school, the man in the blue shirt said, "My name is Qinji Dongchen, the footprints of the footsteps. From today onwards I will be your teacher. The first sentence I want to teach you, there are 5 words. It is learn and learn with time." The teacher paused for a long time at the word learning, and said slowly, "The word learning will be interpreted as a reading for the time being." Lu Chen was lying on the windowsill drinking wine. I don't know when there was a celadone wine glass in his hand. He put the wine jug aside, held the wine glass and drank his own wine. Taoli Chunfeng had a glass of wine. Sword of Coming Chapter 1029. After drinking the wine, Lu Chen threw the empty wine bottle into the stream outside the window, and drifted away with the water. No accident, it would be picked up by a new river downstream who knew the goods and put it in his pocket. Yu Gaojiu and the young hidden official are drinking friends, and Qin Pingon and I are Taoist friends, so we are like friends who have never been masked. A meeting ceremony that can refine water transportation is not a respect. Turning around and laughing with Ningji, Mr. Qin is about to teach a book. You go to the school with me first and have a look at some interesting things. There was a string of bells hanging under the eaves outside the house, and a long rope hung down. The end of the rope was about the same height as Qin Pingan's outstretched arm. Zhang Jiaolu really owed his hands, so he was going to ring the bell, but Ningji stopped him. Lu Qin laughed. They can't hear except you and me. Seeing that the young man insisted on his own opinion, Lu Qin had to give up, and took the young man to look at another object and asked if he knew what it was. Ningji couldn't explain it clearly, so Lu Qin began to introduce it. It turned out that Qin Pingon was outside the school and made a simple sundial with his own hands. It was engraved with the characters of the 12 earthly branches, and used the shadow of the sun to time the time. There are 12 hours in a day and 1 hour is 8 quarters. It's just that it's impossible to confirm the time on rainy days, so Qin Pingon asked Zhou Xian to say hello to himself at some important nodes and remind him. Lu Qin stretched out a finger, pressed the sun shadow on the sundial, and began to move. The sun shadow moved quickly with the fingers of Master Lu. Ningji turned his head to look at the school subconsciously. The scene in the house was like a book that turned pages quickly. When Lu Qin retracted his finger, the picture was frozen and everything returned to normal. Then Lu Qin walked into Qin Pingan's house. Although Ningji was curious, he just stood at the door. Unable to stop this headmaster Lu, the young man could always suppress his curiosity. Lu Qin looked at the stacks of books on the table. At least half of them were the first drafts compiled by Qin Pingon himself, and smiled knowingly. It seemed that Qin Pingon was in this village school and used it as a beginner's book for the opening of the school, not only under the mountain. The General 300,000 and Dragon When Whip Shadow, Young Learning Qianglin. These are the common Mongolian books of the mountain school. Walking in the long river of time, the young man who was swimming in the water didn't realize it, and he didn't even feel dizzy. From this, it can be seen that the tenacity of Ningji's skin is extremely outstanding. Lu Qin walked out of the room, shook his wrist, held a pocket sundial in his palm and handed it to Ningji. Next, it's up to you to control the speed of the passage of time. Ningji shook his head. Lu Qin smiled and said, Ningji, remember a truth: whether you have it or not and whether you use it or not are two different things. It's a world of difference. Ningji hesitated and thanked Zhang Zhangjiao. The young man carefully took the sundial, which was a little lighter than expected. Then Ningji asked, Master Lu, can you make sure Qin go slower or go back? Lu Qin secretly praised the young man's inference, nodded and said indifferently, Of course, it is a trick of carving insects that on the mountain will know. The young man smacked his tongue incessantly. Are all the gods on the mountain so powerful? Lu Qin rejoiced in misfortune, since most of them are not his direct disciples anyway, so it is a good idea to cheat. One day in the future, when the young man finds out that Qin Pingon can't even control a long river of time, then his eyes will be wide open, and when Lu Qin thinks about this scene now, he finds it interesting, exciting and very interesting. In the school, some children's hands and nails were full of dirt. There are also poor families, calloused hands at a young age, no shoes or slightly better, put on a new pair of shoes when they enter school. There is that person who is naturally active, like someone who doesn't have a long butt. In class, he either likes to be swayed or he likes to tease the adjacent table. Standing at the door, Ningji was a little afraid to enter the school. Lu Qin stood aside, put one leg up on the windowsill and bent over to press his leg there. Ningji asked in a low voice, Why doesn't Daoist Wu use his real name? He never dared to speak in a normal voice. The young man always felt that it would disturb Wu Decheng's lectures. Lu Qin smiled and said, This habit is not very good, it's not fair enough. When you walk around the world, you don't say yes, you don't change your name, you don't change your surname. As a friend, you have to persuade Qin Pingon well when you go back to the poor road. Wu Di, the homonym, is invincible. The origin of this pseudonym is that he once visited the Suyun sect together with a good friend back then. Over there he made up his mind temporarily, calling himself Qinhaoren, the road name invincible, saying that he likes to walk straight and let Suo Yunzong block the ancestral mountain on the road, move the top of the mountain. Listen and see, what are you? Suo Yunzong's concierge. Do you want to hit someone when you hear this kind of bastard? Ningji said, Wu Daochang always has his reasons for doing things. Lu Qin smiled knowingly. It's a coincidence, his friend's name is Lu Jinglong and he was called his disciple at that time and he changed his name together. He has no Taoist name yet, so he is called Lu Dao. A person who will believe that good people are rewarded for the rest of their lives. Qin Haoren Lu Dao, who is very patient in reasoning, firmly believes that he can always make sense with others. If he focuses on the key points, isn't he a good person who can reason well? In this way it is indeed a beautiful vision. Ningji said, Master Lu is traveling abroad, so he doesn't need a pseudonym. Lu Qin interlaced his hands and fingers, held it high above his head, pressed his legs sideways over there repeatedly and said with a smile, Pin Dao is out of the house and prefers to use his real name, but most people have heard of it, even if they know that there is such a thing as Lu Qin in the world. The number of people must not be taken seriously. Some people have heard that as long as the poor don't want them to think more, they can't think more about Bai Yujing and Zhangjiao Lu. There are a handful of monks on the mountain, Mort's a long-acquainted friend, so it doesn't matter if you hide your identity. As for the origin of the traces, Lu Qin pointed to the willow yi in the distance. Look, every winter and spring come, the willow branches are newly turned and the scenery is old. The old traces, the traces of the past that have passed away, have a bit of sadness and nostalgia. Life going around is like grinding a cow, stepping on the old traces step by step. Go and don't repeat the words, the bitterness is too sad. Speaking of this, Lu Qin was proud, squinting and smiling. If you read more in the future, you will find an interesting thing. If you really have to worry about it, the phrase, Qinji, actually originated from Pindo's, Tian Luck. Ningji, let me tell you a word without bragging. In the past 6,000 years in several worlds, no matter who or what Dao origin, as long as you have a little knowledge, each family will write books and make statements. The characters who are mentioned most in the books, if there are any, if you can make a summary of the good people, then the Pin Dao does not say that it is firmly at the top of the list, and it is definitely among the top 3. Even in the Buddhist koan there are many quotes from the Pin Dao which are used to beat the machine. Having said that, Lu Qin patted his stomach and said, The biggest meal in the world is the biggest, are you hungry? Just as Ningji was about to shake his head, his stomach gurgled in disgrace, as if Daoist Lu had reminded him, and the young man realized his hunger. Lu Qin put away his legs and ran to the yellow mud stove that was also used as a pile of debris and where the warrior Zhou Xian laid the ground floor. After handing a bowl of wontons to Ningji, Lu Qin sat on the threshold of the stove with a celadone jug at his feet, which contained the bayberry shochu made last year. Tapped the mouth of the bowl with chopsticks and asked with a smile, Ningji, do you think reading can be eaten as a meal? The young man squatted aside, holding a bowl in one hand and chopsticks in one hand. Hearing Dao Changlu's question, he quickly swallowed the wonton in his stomach and said, The world is better now. Lu Qin put down his chopsticks like flying, devoured it, picked up the last wonton from the bowl and said with a smile, In the past there was a very powerful Taoist cultivator on your side of Aquarius. A sword cultivator with a clear mind. His name is Li Tuanjing. He has a very interesting saying that in today's world the reason why Qi practitioners are masters in the mountains is that God enjoys eating, and Qi practitioners are the bowl which seems to be the biggest. The food in the bowl, but it turned the wontons into the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. If God changed the method at the beginning, for example, who is the best at weaving straw shoes, who is the best in craftsmanship, and who is the uncle, then it will be a different situation. Ningji wondered, what did Dao Master Lu tell me about these big truths? After drinking the remaining soup in the bowl, Lu Qin burped, put the empty bowl beside his feet, put his chopsticks on the bowl, picked up the pot of green plum shochu and took a gulp of spirits. The Taoist shivered and laughed. Dao, we always do too much and think too little. We eat too much and we have nothing to do. So in the eyes of the poor Taoist master, what is a Taoist? Only you have more than enough to serve the world. Ningji asked tentatively, Is it like I'm hungry but am empty-handed and Daoist Lu is kind enough to make a bowl of wontons for me to eat? Lu Qin snorted and said in surprise, Is the young man so enlightened? Ningji hesitated for a moment, but the ingredients and the kitchen are from Dao Changwu. Lu Qin suddenly burst into laughter and finally managed to restrain his smile, raised his head and drank the bayberry soju, then turned his head and blinked at the young man. Then you feel that you are in between being hungry and having a full meal and you are in a poor way to the end. What have you done? Ningji subconsciously glanced at the empty bowl beside Lu Daocheng's feet and the pair of chopsticks placed on top, then looked at the bowl and chopsticks in his hands. The teenager shook his head, always feeling that the answer in his heart was wrong after all. Lending money is like giving and collecting debt is like collecting. Lu Qin smiled and said, It has been natural since ancient times. Ningji didn't think much about it. Anyway, he didn't understand. He just put away Dao Chonglu's bowls and chopsticks, walked into the stove, cleaned them first, and then put the bowls and chopsticks back into the cabinet and bamboo tube. Lu Chen wrapped his arms around his sleeves and turned his head to stare at the blue shirt on the school's side. The school starts on time every day in the middle of the hour, and the early class is endorsed for 2/4 of an hour. Children who are late will be punished. They will stand in the classroom and stand against the wall. If there are too many times, they will be hit by a wooden board and eaten 3 times. Among them, Meng Tong, who are playful, forgetful, and have not completed their schoolwork, have a table and stool behind them in addition to the penalty stand and the ruler, so that they can use it to make up their schoolwork before returning to their seats. The seats in the school are divided into 3 columns according to age groups, namely 6 to 8 years old, 8 to 10 years old, and 10 years old and above. More than a dozen children, each with its own desk and bench. Because there are not many students, it is not crowded. Qin Pingon sat on a chair opposite the Meng children. He seemed to close his eyes and rest in peace, but in fact he listened carefully to the different reading sounds of the 3 children. Lu Chen smiled and asked, "Ningji, do you know what the sound of a book is?" The young man shook his head. A reader is a reader, and reading is naturally read out word by word. Lu Chen leaned his back against the windowsill with his arms wrapped around his sleeves and explained with a smile. The original meaning is the sound of gold and stone hitting each other. The quality is like a clear chime. The sound is like a solitary tree. The sound is sloping and the rocks are rocky. Later generations felt that the meaning of this stack of words is real. Beautiful, it is used to describe a good reading sound, and now it is. For 3 different age groups, Qin Pingon will teach different levels of homework. For example, in the teaching of the school yesterday and the endorsement this morning, if the child feels that he is familiar with the memorization, he can raise his hand to indicate that Qin Pingon will let him go to his side and check it again. Meng Tong repeated the rough text of the paragraphs he had memorized by himself. At that moment, it seemed that the identities of the teacher and the student were reversed. If it is clear and generally correct, Qin Pingon will nod his head and let the child return to his seat. If Meng Tong's endorsement is accurate, the text is still not accurate enough, or the content is missing, Qin Pingon will help to correct it and check for omissions. Fill in the gaps and then let the child go back and continue to recite. In the past few days, Lu Chen, who has not been bothering Ningji to watch the scenes of time, finally opened his mouth and reminded, "Ningji, don't underestimate the part of Meng Tong's retelling. This is the essence of both teaching and studying. In the future, when the students walk out of the school, whether they can start their careers and even whether they can make a difference, come out of their own way and speak on behalf of the sages, this is all in one fell swoop." The teacher taught the book to Meng Tong's endorsement, and then to the reversed lecture the student taught, the teacher listened. There is a sequence here, there is a sequence. This is to know the reason and to know the sequence, then the approach is close. Ningji said, "Master Lu is at Baiyujing and he will give lectures too, right?" Lu Chen smiled, "Too lazy to do it occasionally. There are too many smart people on the 12th floor of Baiyujing 5 City, and almost none of them are stupid, which is the reason why I don't want to preach. In terms of the breadth and depth of knowledge for thousands of years in the world, apart from the number of people with a few hands, the gap between everyone and Lu Chen is just one Lu Chen." Ningji didn't think too much about it, he just thought that the Immortals of Baiyujing were so smart that they didn't need to attend lectures. In fact, it is just the opposite. Just as Lu Chen once joked with Qin Pingon, Cui Dongshan's sleeve is called "beating the stupid place," and his sleeve belongs to the smart place in the world. After the end of the morning class endorsement, the next is the daily formal class. Qin Pingon led the Meng children to read the Book of Life for about half an hour. There were 3 columns of students and the content of the reading was different. From the lowest to the highest, Qin Pingon came in order. The other 2 Meng Tong can read the book by themselves or read new books by themselves, but their voices should not be too loud. Read it 100 times and read it 100 times. Of course, you can also listen to the teacher's lectures. For example, 6 or 7-year-old children, as long as they are interested, can listen to the teacher's homework for students over 10 years old. Generally speaking, in rural villages, families do not have too high expectations for their children to go to school. They just want their children to learn some words in the future, to be able to keep accounts, and to write a few couplets during Chinese New Year. Therefore, the general school teachers usually follow the steps step by step, asking the children to read and recite and learn to write. There are printed copies and copybooks specially used to trace read and postscripts. Over time, students can get rid of their own writing and the master will teach the brushwork. In addition to the Confucian classics officially recognized by the Confucian Temple and the Imperial Court, he will also read ancient texts. At this time you can start learning how to write. In the countryside, the conditions are simple, and if you only talk about writing lessons, you can only do it mostly with charcoal or with stones similar to yellow mud to write on a thin bluestone board of moderate size. It is convenient for repeated use. Or the wooden sand table is filled with a layer of fine sand from the streams and rivers, and the branches or cut bamboo are used as pens. Just like here, there is a green bamboo pen holder on each desk, which is filled with thin bamboo pens, and a square wooden box sand tray is placed in the desk drawer. There is also a thick booklet the size of a slab with an odd title. It is Fu Er Shu, which is more than 3,000 characters selected by Qin Pingon from 300,000 other Enlightenment books, and each character is divided into several contents. Small capital letters indicate pronunciation, word meaning, and several common phrases. Ningji was a little envious of the book Fu Er Zi, and Zhang was very understanding, so the young man had another book in his hand in addition to the pocket sundial. The boy asked, "Do you have to recognize so many words before leaving the school?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "Of course, as long as you can recognize 3,000 or 4,000 words. What book can't you read in the future?" The boy asked again, "Can you do it?" Lu Chen said, "You can definitely do it. As for a child in this school who is studying hard, even if he is 6 years old, he can learn for 5 or 6 years. Indeed, it is difficult to say that it belongs to Meng Tong, who is not suitable for studying by nature." The young man hesitated. This day, after school, Mr. Qin and the young man named Zhou Xian were eating at the same table, and Zhou Xian helped Ningji to ask a question. "What should I do about those Meng Tong who are not enlightened when they read?" Mr. Qin gave an answer with a smile. "Studying is hard, but it is extremely difficult. It is worse than hard work. In a young school career, as long as you learn the word hard work, you will get your true duty and ability. No matter what you do in the future, you will have a skill, but if all your peers endure hardships in the school years, you will lose it early. If you work hard, you will get out of the school in the future. What will you do?" Not to mention everyone, but the vast majority of people are prone to self-suggestion when they encounter difficulties, slack in their hearts, unwilling to insist on something and give up early. This is really the beginning of everything is difficult. At the dinner table, Qin Pingon suddenly asked, "Zhao Xiu, do you think whether a person works hard is also a talent?" Zhao Xiu thought about it for a moment, but he still couldn't seem to give an answer. He just said, "Similar in nature but far from each other?" Qin Pingon smiled and nodded. "Teaching is not strict, teachers are lazy. From tomorrow the board will be played harder." Zhao Xiu held back for a long time and said, "The girls in the school occasionally forget their homework. Why don't they see how the master punishes them? It seems that they haven't even used the ruler. They just went to the back and punished them for a stop as usual with tears in their eyes. When master saw it, he would immediately soften his heart and quickly find a compromise. He asked them to recite a few sentences and paragraphs, most of which were extremely difficult assignments, and pass the examination. If they do, they will be asked to return to their seats to read." Qin Pingon glared. "They are girls after all, not to mention you said that they just forget their schoolwork occasionally. Can they be like those naughty boys?" Zhao Xiu was silent, just casually said, "Master, why are you so anxious? After reading raw books every day, the next step is to warm cooked books." Since they were teaching Meng Tong to 3 age groups, it would take about half an hour. As a starting point for young children to learn, Qin Pingon not only taught the 4 books and 5 classics, which was slightly rigid, followed the rules, and taught the content in strict order, in addition to several classics and book passages that he carefully selected and found to be pure and rational. The teaching purpose is naturally to take the most mellow books of the ancients and sages, and to learn from a broad perspective, so these sentences or paragraphs do not need to be so step by step. They are relatively simple and easy to understand. There is also a book of filial piety. In the interval between Wen and familiar books, Qin Pingon will follow certain sentences and make some point-to-point extensions, and emphasize some basic etiquette for children and others with Meng Tong. It's easy to fail in the words of rationality, it's not as good as the words of propriety. Lu Chen sat on the table by the back wall, clasped the back of his head with both hands, smiled and said, "Hundreds of good and filial piety come first. Ningji, have you noticed that there are many local ruffians and rogues who fight and kill outside no matter how much they do? When I get home, I either meet the mouse when I see my father, or I don't dare to be called an unfilial son no matter what the reputation is. There are also some children who were especially naughty when they were studying. The teacher of the teacher will still be respectful, may be willing to pinch the nose, bite the bullet, and obey a few words. Ningji is usually sitting on the bench, sitting upright like a squatting child, listening carefully to Mr. Chen's lectures. Ningji wondered, Master Lu, is it the first course arranged with Mr. Chen and there is a big discrepancy? Previously, Headmaster Lu showed him a piece of paper that recorded the course schedule in detail. In many places, it was different from the current academic plan that was actually implemented. Lu Chen smiled and said, he was overthrown by himself. To be precise, Qin Pingon was going to take a break, but he probably felt that teaching like this at the beginning was too difficult, and Meng Tong would not be able to keep up with the progress. They can easily lose interest in reading. Although it is a very hard thing to go to school, if a teacher can make Meng Tong feel less boring at the beginning of teaching as much as possible, of course, it is more all right. Lu Chen flipped his wrist and took a book from the desk drawer of Qin Pingan's residence and handed it to Ningji. Look at what's different. Ningji opened the pages of the school's reading book and found that in the margins, next to many words, many annotations were written in teeny small capital letters. The text content is several times larger than the reading itself. Lu Chen smiled and said, this is the book Qin Pingan used to teach. Meng Tong will not know about Mr. Teach's thoughts and skills. Ningji asked curiously, are all teachers in the world like this? Lu Chen said, the mind and the idea are similar, it's just that the time consuming is different and the effort is different. Lu Chen shook his sleeves, threw out a stack of paper and handed it to the young man. This is the sage of Zhaoling, who is not a sage of the Confucian temple, but a sage and masters thus explanation of words. These scattered pages have not yet been compiled into a book, are they? Manuscripts in the true sense are not the so-called manuscripts that will be published later. You keep it, you don't have to return it, how to deal with it in the future, and you don't need to ask the meaning of the poor. Don't be pretentious. Do you think you will be rewarded without merit? Pin Dao and you meet by chance, and I will definitely meet again after you come. Except for the student book and the Wenshu book, the difference is not big, only a few book lists have been changed, but after that the talking book item on the paper was directly deleted by Mr. Chen, and the note was made with a red pen on the paper put on hold. And the subsequent www. novel. Com, for example, the first course formulated by Mr. Chen, is to read and examine the differences in the governance of a certain person, look at the provincial records and cite examples of dictionaries, 3 pages per week. Juzi Primary School 1 page per day, etc. Moreover, in this column Mr. Chen had several signs of changing the number of Zhu pens, and he kept ticking them off and rewriting them. More than once, the result was eventually replaced by Mr. Chen with more simple and superficial books, and one more book was added. The drawing book, of course, is also from Mr. Chen's manuscript book, painting various mountains and rivers, hundreds of techniques, etc., supplemented by words, pictures and texts. Just talking about this book, the front pages are mostly related to rural villages and secular life, such as spring plowing, farming time, grains and various trees and fish. At the same time, the writing class, which is the last item in the morning, has also undergone great changes. For example, the earliest plan for Mongolian children of different school ages is daily writing, cross on the forehead of ancient steels, Shuan interpretation of Chinese characters. 3. The characters range from 5 characters to 5, and during the teaching period, the rhythm, exegesis, etc. can be briefly explained. The Book of Filial Piety or the Classic of Huang Ting should be written in block script, in bold pen and written on 2 pages. After that, there was another idea that was finally abandoned by Mr. Chen, that is, to teach Meng Tong to learn to write not from the regular script, but completely according to the origin of the font, starting from the small seal script, then the official script and finally the regular script. As for running script and cursive script as well as the more ancient insect bird seal script, Mr. Chen first commented on the word inappropriate, and then he thought of a few workarounds such as whether to teach only a few words so that people can be confused. Tong knows that there are still these kinds of fonts in the world. The result is still ticked off by the red pen, and Mr. Chen commented again next to it, it's not right to think about it. There is also a stack of paper on the table alone with many notes written on it. For example, regarding filial piety and filial piety, Mr. Chin has written several words to remind himself, and it is obviously his handwriting and experience in different time periods. Should I say no? It is necessary to carefully explain the difference between the two and be cautious. If there is no absolute certainty and the right time, don't mention it. Another example is the sentence, in the world, determination comes first. Then Mr. Chin had a question. Can the determination of young children be divided into levels, sizes and priorities? The master said that when his parents are here he should not travel far and he must travel well. But when you are with your parents you must not be ignorant, one is joyful, the other is fearful. Both languages can be explained together. There are still some questions and ideas which are written in teeny small letters or running script, and a whole page of paper is still unfinished, and there are dense texts related to it on the reverse side. There is also a manuscript booklet that has not been used in the school for the time being. It is still handwritten by Qin Pingan. Collected the aphorisms and aphorisms of ancient and modern masters, ancient people's shallow words, good words and deeds, intercepted some popular poems and so on. There is another thin abridged version which is catchy to read because it rhymes and seems to be jingle. In the early years Qin Pingan went out for a long trip alone, and later on the Tongyi's house side he took Xia Heaton on the night road together and he used it all. All of them are based on the original script of Li Shilang from the night cruise Entry City, picking and choosing and compiled the rhyme. 36 excellent essays by writers of past dynasties dedicated to describing landscapes were selected, and they were divided into 3 volumes by Qin Pingan. Each volume has its own simple and beautiful prose. In the school's calligraphy class, Qin Pingan first taught Mengtong to write their own names. If they had been in a school for a few years before, they learned to write sentences like learn and learn from time to time, otherwise it would be a hall in the village ancestral hall. The numbered plaque and the few couplets. In addition, there are some well-known but easy-to-understand verses, such as raising your head to look at the bright moon, the city springs with deep grass and trees, and the day is full of mountains. The spring is late Huimukiki. While the Mengtong children are burying their heads in writing, the teacher in the Confucian shirt, long coat and cloth shoes walks between the 3 rows of desks with his hands behind his back, occasionally reaching out and twisting the Mengtong's pen tube. If Qin Pingan mentions it lightly, he will remind them to pay attention and learn to concentrate when holding a pen and writing. Or stop and point out that a certain stroke is wrong when the child is writing. When the calligraphy class is over, it is noon and the class ends on time. Mengtong can go home for lunch and have half an hour to spare. If there are only 2 meals a day, morning and evening, just play with each other, climb the tree to catch birds and go down to the river to fish at will. Lu Qin and Ning Ji were like 2 out-and-out outsiders, watching the liveliness of the open space outside the school. Whenever this time, Zhou Xian, who looks tall and strong, comes in handy because the master will ask him to practice a set of boxing techniques. Zhou Xian was thin-skinned, but it was actually quite embarrassing at the beginning. The key master also told him to make some noises, the dust was flying and the 2 sleeves were crackling. For those active boys, watching Zhou Xian boxing is not much different than following the elders in the family to go to the county town, to go to the market, watch the temple fair, or buy New Year's goods during the New Year's Day. And Qin Pingan himself went to the kitchen to eat, holding a bowl, leaning against the door and standing there watching Zhou Xia's jokes. There are 3 girls in Mengtong who like to kick the shuttlecock, so Qin Pingan made a few copper coin feather shuttlecocks and a feather duster. By the way, Qin Pingan would occasionally call a yellow-faced and thin Mengtong to have lunch together. This child was sitting in the middle of the school, but he looked even shorter and thinner than the 5 or 6-year-old Mengtong who had just entered school. He only called twice and the child was all red. Without nodding his face, Qin Pingan thought about it and stopped insisting. Due to the low tuition fees and the small number of Mengtong children, Qin Pingan built a vegetable garden near the school, surrounded it with a bamboo fence, raised some chickens and ducks and rented it from the villagers at a low price. A small bamboo forest and tea garden, together with Zhou Xian, reclaimed wasteland on the mountain, planted some crops such as corn and planted fruit trees such as peaches and loquats. Originally, Qin Pingan was thinking about whether to make a pigsty and buy 2 piglets. He also thought about planting mulberry trees, but whether raising pigs or silkworms, the smell was heavy, so just think about it. If you really want to improve the food, you can go to the mountain to set up traps and cover, but it is not enough. Let Zhou Xian catch the deer and wild boar. Lu Chen leaned against the sundial, stretched out a finger and wrote a word, in the air. The Taoist priest and the young man on the side explained with a smile. The word later evolved into you, which in ancient times means the appearance of wanting to stretch out. In 2 days, there will be an old Taoist immortal who will make a piece that joins the Taoist galaxy. This is the surname of Lao Zhenren, and he is used to call him Fu Lu Yuxian on the mountain, which is somewhat similar to Tan Tianzhou Shu Di Lu of the Yinyang family, and of course Pei Min, one of the 3 great swordsmen. Speaking of this, Lu Chen raised his hand, and in his hand there were 2 more hiking sticks made of green bamboo, which he threw to the boy and said with a smile, "Let's go, I'll show you around the nearby mountains and rivers." Ningji stretched out his hand and took the green bamboo stick and said, "Lord Daoist, my foot strength is okay." Lu Chen took the lead to move, walked out of the drying yard on the side of the school, walked along a small road by the stream to the next village and said with a casual smile, "Whether it's a literati traveling in the mountains and water or a literate person who travels the mountains and waters to make a living, when there is always a lack of physical strength, take 10,000 steps back and say, no matter how good a person's legs are, his heart is. Just take it." A young Taoist priest wearing a lotus crown hangs a black bag around his waist, poking the ground with a bamboo stick, leisurely. At a young age, in addition to studying and increasing knowledge, you also need to pay attention to a person who cultivates vitality, nourishes the spirit, strengthens the body, and is stable. Physique. Always let the consciousness abdicate and the primordial spirit return. This is what we Taoists call constantly protect the child. As for what is consciousness and what is primordial spirit, if you have the opportunity to practice in the future, you will understand it. Remember to communicate with you. Preacher, please ask one more question: the origin of Yuanshan and Yuanying. In the future, on the way of studying and cultivating the Tao, you will definitely encounter a kind of entangled person. It has nothing to do with good or bad, good or evil, but just unsettled. Knowing that you have done something wrong, you must be willing to say sorry to others, and when you encounter excessive demands from others, you must also dare to say no. Feel free, I am still me, and things turn around, I am who I am. When he came to the stream, Lu Chen washed his face with water. There was an old camphor tree with green shade on the bank. Lu Chen sat on the stone and rested for a while. Said, "Don't blindly praise the ancients." Blind looking at the ancient books, his eyes slid into the pile of old papers, but he couldn't come out. Just like Chin Pingon, when reading you must first thicken the book, then thin it, and finally do one thing, and the remaining few words that are in harmony with the book, or 1 or 2 truths. Any book, whether it is known as 100 generations unchangeable classics, or miscellaneous books that are not orthodox enough, or even considered unpopular, to be able to get 1 or 2 truths that truly belong to you is already a rare thing, and it is not considered a free reading. Speaking of this, Lu Chen stretched out his left hand, put his fingers together, twisted and drew a few circles. The young man was horrified to find that the greenness of the shade of the tree had been condensed by the Taoist priest. Lu Chen looked into the stream again. When he hooked his fingers, a wet blue stone jumped out of the water, rubbed it in his right hand, and the crumbs fell and finally turned into 2 long strips of turquoise green seals. The Taoist held the seals with his 2 fingers. Using the fingers of his left hand as a carving knife, he began to engrave the seals, namely, "Opening the book is beneficial, and Ningji has read it." They handed them over to the young man and smiled. "If you come across a good book that you like in the future, you can stamp this on the page." 2 seals. The young man was really happy to see it, so he was welcome and quickly thanked the headmaster Lu. Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand. "What are you being polite to the poor Taoist? I really feel sorry for it. On the way to practice in the future, since the registration number, you can add an additional number. In a word, Lu Chen is your little master. Although you and I are the kind of masters and apprentices that are not justifiable, we must remember the past, and we still need to talk about the incense in the past." Afterwards, the young man followed the Taoist priest along the mountain road. There were dark clouds above his head and there were thunderstorms. It looked like it was going to rain. When they came to a top of the mountain, the local people called this place commonly known as Senjiling. In an instant, the rain was majestic and the sky and the earth were dark. Lu Chen handed Ningji an oil paper umbrella. The rain poured down like a gap in the sky. The 2 stood in place with umbrellas. Lu Chen smiled and said, "What is a perfect person? And the nature stretches without omission." The first-class scholar among the heavens and the earth learns from the word li, or opens up or stabilizes the road, so that the road of the world is not dry and cracked in drought and not muddy in the rainy season. just like the road when we came. Second-class scholars spend their whole lives studying the word Li, striving to get it right and inheriting the incense of Taoism. It's like the house over there and the umbrella in our hands. Thirdly, studying in the study, reading the scriptures with white heads and going around on the character can also benefit the context. Just like every 3 or 5 miles, there is a pavilion on the side of the road. The next step is to read a lot of sages, and sages still half a bucket of water, seek benefits and avoid harm, but have no intention of harming others, and are willing to do some good deeds within their ability. The scholars in the world, such people make up 8 or 9 out of 10. The next level is the vulgar and unbearable Confucian, who is sane, old-fashioned and pedantic. The greater the harm to the world. It's like a certain kind of person said in a Buddhist scripture, who enters my law and lives in my monastery and destroys my righteousness. Soybean-sized raindrops made the oil paper umbrella tremble. Ningji vaguely saw that among the muddy mountain roads in the distance, someone was walking fast and came here. The teenager has a good memory and is good at capturing details. He is keen to discover that the Zhou Xian who came here by the mountain is not the Zhou Xian of today. Lu Chen said, Zhou Xian came here to practice boxing. At the school you are constrained by your hands and feet. This boxing move can't be used and the movement of punching is too loud. Chuiyu has a boxing method called Yunzhan Day's style. Sure enough, then Zhao Shu came down to the top of the mountain, stood on his feet, sighed in his dantian, opened his boxing frame and started throwing punches towards the sky. Lu Chen and the young man explained, this boxing has a great origin. There is an old man named Cui who belongs to the Confucian scholar of Yaxing. He reads a lot. One day he saw an allusion of the barnyard official's wild history in the book. After several years of drought, the people were struggling to survive. There was a female rain teacher who took pity on the common people and did not hesitate to violate the laws of heaven and rained rain on the world without authorization. As a result, she was punished by the heavenly court, and her golden body was detained on the platform of the gods. Breaking the golden body, and then demoting her to the mortal world, it is said that in the edict of the Emperor Shen, there is a phrase self-inflicted. When the old man surnamed Cui saw this, he was full of resentment and anger. It happened to be the plum season and it was raining heavily outside the house. He went out and got such a punch. Ningji looked up at the sky subconsciously and asked, Master Lu, is this really the case? Lu Chen smiled and said, I'm tired and lazy and my technique is not good. I don't dare to wait to the time before 10,000 years, so I don't dare to say whether this is true or not. The clay bottle alley boy from Lizidongshan, the kiln worker Sissy, and Cui Qing, who later entered the unfortunate Mangosteen, I believe that the 3 of them would never have imagined that they would be connected in a strange way. A pouring downpour, as if the gods were pouring ink on the world, coming and going quickly. After Zhao Xuxia handed out a dozen punches, he was exhausted. He took a short rest, held his breath and walked down the mountain to return to the school. Lu Chen then took Ningji to another hill called Wu Nai Tan. The fish in the pond was different from other places. The Crucian carp and loach here both had a golden thread on their bodies. This is also a place to pray for rain during severe droughts. Elderly villagers and sages need to fast for 3 days in the ancestral hall, and then go up the mountain to pray for rain. It often rains before the team returns to the village. Signs very effective. Ningji asked, did the rain master who was banished from the sky to the mortal world live here? Lu Chen smiled and said, it's impossible to say, who knows. The local folklore and local county annals only say that it is related to the genus of a passing dragon, and does not mention the rain master. In the afternoon of the school, classes start at midnight, and when the application period ends, Mengtong can be considered dismissed from school. One day almost 3.5 hours. In addition to the daily classes, the school also has 3 monthly classes every month. On a certain afternoon when the get out of class ends half an hour early from the time of application, it is usually Qin Pingon who teaches Mengtong additional reading and writing classes. Classmate books, in addition to Mongolian school textbooks, have no academic requirements. Qin Pingon will come up with more than a dozen books of different categories, involving phonology, gold and stone, heaven and water, laws and regulations, etc., and let the children read it by themselves. If there are problems, you can ask him about uncommon words or the semantics of a certain sentence. Qin Pingon will also take out some real objects and put them on the table, similar to a few steel inscriptions that can be bought anywhere in general bookstores, a few square seals carved by himself, porcelain, etc. So that Meng Tong has the most intuitive impression. Know what a what is? Then there are some busy farming seasons and the rural school will only have half-day classes. The teacher would also help with the field work, so some old people would get together behind their backs and laugh a few words, similar to Mr. Chen doing farm work. In order to grab water, there are frequent quarrels and fights between the upper and lower villages and large-scale armed fights are possible. But as long as no casualties are caused, the county town generally ignores these. Almost all the villages under the school surnamed Qin, and the largest Wuxia village at the entrance of the mountain call. The two sides fought the most fiercely for water. Not long ago there was a fierce fight. Almost all the young people in the two villages participated, because there is a child here at the school and his father is among them. This seemingly dull and sullen guy is ruthless. It is estimated that Wuxia village knows the root and the bottom. Several people beat him. Originally he was squatting in the distance. Chen Pingon, who was watching the excitement, saw that the man was knocking over the ground with a shoulder pole, so he had to trot all the way, and among the sticks and hose he found an opportunity to help the fallen man and ran away. A few women in Wuxia village, I don't know whether they think the teacher is really unbeatable, or whether they think that the man in the blue shirt and the cloth shoes is different from the ordinary peasant man who is tired of watching. They go up to block the road while laughing. The oil ran fast, but it was the man, gasping for breath, just nodding to the teacher. The country villagers, polite words, not very expressive, just grinning. The eyes of the simple man were full of thanks. And then in the local dialect he scolded the mother-in-law in the neighboring village and strode back to the battlefield. The next day when the two old masters from Wuxia village heard about this, they cursed at the wine table. For that little tuition fee this child really doesn't want any face. At that time outside the battlefield, Daoist priests and teenagers squatted by the roadside, eating melon seeds and watching a play. Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's the same up and down the mountain. It's just two important things. You can beat it and you can run away." Ningji was puzzled and couldn't help but ask, "Master Lu, isn't Mr. Chen a cultivator?" Lu Chen said, "I'm learning from someone." Ningji stopped meeting with Headmaster Lu now and asked curiously, "Who is someone?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "He is to Chen Pingon just as Chen Pingon is to you. As for who this person is, you don't need to know for the time being." In this Yenzhou prefecture there are several customs. In some rural villages, it is often paid by the clan temple to invite the opera troupe to dance a bamboo horse. Stringing colorful bells, beating gongs and drums, begging for good omens, it was extremely lively, and the children were just behind the bamboo horse team making noises almost like a festival. In addition, there are often two villages where men and women marry each other and become married, which is called kinship. In the first month of every year, even if they are far apart, they will go to each other's ancestral hall to worship incense, set off firecrackers, and then go to each other's ancestral hall to worship incense and set off firecrackers. Have a local meal. Just like the village in the middle, it is a relative of a large village dozens of miles away. Every time it fights for water with the crowded Wuxia village or encounters a dispute, and is at a disadvantage and is bullied, there will be incidents that night. The villagers went to the top of the mountain to light a bonfire. The next day there would be a large group of people in the relative village. Before dawn they prepared their own rations for the day and rushed to this place. Without a word they went straight to the ancestral hall in Wuxia village. Lu Chen once took the teenager out on a far journey, and saw with his own eyes the erection and movement of some prefecture county boundary monuments. The teenager was also in a certain dynasty. On the lunar day of each month there were old blind men holding mudwa. On the road there is a kind of church people's list, most of which are concise and to the point, often only a few sentences, no more than 30 words. Chief Lu will explain the pros and cons of a country's laws, imperial edicts, local village conventions and clan rules with the boy. In the school there is a child who is often beaten. His family is in the village and belongs to the kind of relatively well-off family. The child didn't say anything, and when he got home he didn't complain. It was estimated that the parents and elders saw the red and swollen palms of their own children, and immediately became unhappy. "Children, I will not study in this school in the future." The gentleman didn't say anything, just nodded in agreement. As a result, the couple walked on the front foot, and the child sneaked to the school, his face flushed. Mr. Chen patted his head and said with a smile, "If you make mistakes in the future, you will still be beaten by Mr. will be lighter." The child grinned, scratched his head and said nothing. Every day after school and get out of class, Chen Pingon often goes fishing by the stream, and he can also let Zhao Shu cook and set up a small stove for dinner. There are a few Mengtong who are not good at reading every day and seem not to work very hard. They dared to go fishing with their husband. One of them was a tall man who did not wear shoes all the year round. Before leaving, a long string of stream fish probably wanted to be secretly put into the fish basket of the husband. Maybe he was thin-skinned and didn't dare to do so, so he deliberately threw it near the fish basket and ran away. Qin Pingon was not polite and threw the string of stream fish into the fish basket. As a result, in the early morning of the next day, the child didn't turn in his schoolwork, and he still suffered a slap in the face, grinning in pain. So the child was hit with another chestnut, and the pain was so painful that he held his head on the spot. The husband raised his face and lowered his voice to teach a lesson. He has a lot of fishing skills. Do you remember the several kinds of fish on the page of the picture book? The child shook his head with a face, but he didn't lie. He honestly said that he knew the fish in the picture, but he couldn't recognize the characters next to him. The husband laughed and scolded, "Can't remember eating. Why is it so bright when fishing? Is it more difficult to recognize a few words in a book that can't move than to catch so many fish that swim around?" In class this day, the child will focus exclusively on those few pages of pictures and words and ignore the rest. Qin Pingon didn't care when he saw him deserting. There was also that young boy who was in a rush to urinate in class, but he didn't dare to talk to his husband, so he wet his pants in the classroom. After being discovered, the hall burst into laughter, and the husband signaled everyone to be quiet. He personally took the child to wash his pants by the stream so that he would be more courageous in the future. He raised his hand in class and then hinted at the gentleman with his eyes without saying anything. Mr. will find an excuse to let him leave the school. When a child went to school, he was sullen, and the husband asked him what was wrong. The child said that he reasoned with his parents yesterday and he got a big mouth. Qin Pingon asked the child what the reasoning was. The Mengtong, who had learned and applied the truth from the book, twitched. Qin Pingon held back his laughter and comforted a few words. When the class started that day, all the children found that the teacher was always smiling, much more than before. There is a taciturn Mengtong. He lives alone in a village on the mountain. The so-called village is actually only a few households, so he has to walk several miles of mountain roads every day to go to school and after school. No matter how heavy the rainstorm is, this child is never late. Qin Pingon knew that there is a section of road along the mountain which is extremely narrow. In heavy rain there are often flash floods. If you accidentally fall into the flood, it will be unimaginable, so Zhao Xuxia will let Zhao Xuxia every rainy day if the child happens to be going to school or after school, just quietly escorted for a ride. After the next month's class, Qin Pingon smiled and said that he went up the mountain with Mengtong. The children who came and went like a fly were probably the slowest, walking next to the gentleman holding a green bamboo stick. Now, at the door of his house in the dark of night, the child hesitated several times. He probably wanted to invite the husband to sit and have a meal, but the family was too poor to speak. Qin Pingon said with a smile that he had to have a cheeky meal with you. In the dark room, he had a meal with the family and drank some local shochu. The teacher left drunk, but the child secretly sent him a lot. A long night road. Recently, Qin Pingon began to collect prefaces and postscripts of various poems and articles. Qin Pingon also prepared some paper and pen and ink, including red paper for writing Spring Festival couplets and blessing characters. Prepare for the end of the year, select those who are excellent in writing and study, and Mengtong who have worked hard, and give them to them before the closing of the year. In addition, every night Qin Pingon will cut out wood and bamboo plaques, with a total of 300 or 400 pieces, and write a poem or another name for this word. The latter, such as tea, is no night. Bamboo and wooden plaques, the teacher wrote each stroke with ease.